Good afternoon all. Welcome to the workshop on 5G looking into the future. ECE department of SRM University is organizing this workshop in collaboration with IEEE-SRM student branch and IEEE Guntur subsection. So there will be series of talks we will be going to run in the area of 5G as well as the AI for healthcare, which discussions are going on now. Now coming to this workshop will be, which is opening remarks by our Pro VC sir. Then there will be a talk on the overview of the wireless communication and 5G. Then next talk will be on the AI for 5G, and the final talk will be on the its cloud platform, yeah, in the 5G. This is the structure. Now I request our professor Dr. Shiva to introduce our Pro VC sir. Please, Shiva, please introduce.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Uday. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, it's an honor and privilege for me to introduce a researcher of the stature as Professor Narayan Rao sir. I'm sharing the various milestones achieved by sir in his journey as a researcher, mentor, and guide. What goes unsaid but experienced by all of us, Narayan Rau's passion for research and his dedication to mentor and encourage young researchers. Dr. Narayan Rao is a renowned scientist in the field of space, science and radar technology. In his career spanning over 4 decades, he has been widely recognized for building institutions of excellence both in research and academia. Professor Narayan Rao began his career in academia at Sri Venkateswara University. Tirupati, where between 1975 and 2002, he taught physics. He also carried out several major research projects sponsored by Government of India, such as DST, CSIR, Ministry of Earth Science, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, ISRO and UGC. He was appointed by the Government of India as Director, National Atmospheric Research Laboratory of ISRO, Department of Space in 2002. Professor Narayan Rao greatly contributed in making NARL a world-class center of excellence for research in frontier areas of atmospheric science, LIDAR and radar technology between 2002 and 2007. Sir joined as Director of Research at SRM University in 2008, focusing on sensitizing and motivating the young students in developing an aptitude for research. Here he worked closely with the students in designing, developing and fabricating a nano satellite, SRM-SAT, launched by ISRO in October 2011. So, Sir has published more than 150 research papers in highly reputed international journals, and 41 students were awarded their PhD under his research supervision. He has been highly recognized for his scientific contribution and has received many coveted awards, including Sri V. Raman Award for Outstanding Contribution to Physical Sciences by UGC. He has been twice awarded by Honorable Prime Minister of India. First, in 1996, he was awarded for excellence in field of space science and application, and then in 2011, he was given the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Memorial Award. He is a Fellow National Academy of Sciences India and Fellow and Vice President of Institute of Electronics and Telecommunication Engineers and member of several scientific and technical committees. He was President of Andhra Pradesh Academy of Sciences during 2007 to 2010. He has directed a couple of courses at UN Center, the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Italy. In addition, he directed the program and formulated the chain of radars that went on to become international network of tropical and atmospheric radars to study the atmosphere in tropics. Sir, Professor Narayan Rao sir is widely respected globally for academic and scientific assignments and for international scientific contribution, and has partnered with peers in US, Canada, Peru, and other countries. He has made significant contribution through international collaborations in field of atmospheric sciences to monitor regional and global climatic variation. Sir has also worked as visiting professor several times in Nagoya University and Kyoto University, Japan, and also as visiting professor in National Central University, Taiwan. Professor Narayan Rao sir was the General President of Indian Science Congress and organized the 104th Indian Science Congress in Jan 2017 with Sri Narendra Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, as the chief guest. With this introduction, I now request our Chancellor SRM AP, Professor Narayan Rao sir, to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Professor Shankar. The invited speakers of the workshop, Dr. Corey, my good old friend and independent technology consultant, Dr. Aloknath Dey, the Senior Vice President and CTO, Samsung India, Dr. Dilip Krishnaswamy, Vice President, New Technology R&D, Geo of Reliance, the Head of the Department of ECE-SRM University, Andhra Pradesh, Professor Shankar, the convener of the workshop, Dr. Uday Kumar, other members of the organizing committee of the workshop, the faculty members, and my dear participants, I deem it a great honor and a privilege to associate myself with the workshop on 5G looking into the future being organized by the Department of ECE of SRM AP in association with IEEE subsection of Guntur. As all of you are aware that 5G is the fifth generation of mobile networks, a significant evolution of 4G LTE networks. 5G has been designed with a capability to meet the huge demand and growth in data and connectivity of today's modern society, the Internet of Things with billions of connected devices and tomorrow's innovations. In many countries, the initial frequency bands for 5G are below 6 GHz, and of course, in many cases, in the 3.3 to 3.8 GHz bands and similar frequencies to existing mobile Wi-Fi networks. Additional mobile spectrum above 6 GHz, including the 26 to 28 GHz bands, often referred to as millimeter waves, will provide significantly more capacity compared to the current mobile technologies. The additional spectrum and greater capacity will enable more users, more data, and faster connections. Further, 5G deployments may use millimeter wave frequencies, in some of the bands up to 86 GHz. In addition to delivering faster connections and greater capacity, significant advantage of 5G is the fast response time referred to as latency. 3G networks latency of 5G is as low as 1 millisecond. This is virtually instantaneous, opening a new world of connected applications. 5G will enable instantaneous connectivity to billions of devices, the Internet of Things, and a truly connected world. 5G will provide the speed, low latency, and connectivity to enable a new generation of applications, services, and business opportunities. Some of the major applications of 5G are massive machine-to-machine communications, also known as IoT, that involves connecting billions of devices without human intervention at a scale which we have not seen before. This has the potential to revolutionize modern industrial processes and applications, including agriculture, manufacturing, and business communications. Ultra reliable low latency communications, which are mission critical, including real-time control devices, industrial robotics, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, autonomous driving, and safer transportation networks. Low latency communications also open up a new world where remote medical care, procedures, and treatment are all possible. The next one is enhanced mobile broadband, which provides significantly faster data speeds and greater capacity, keeping the world connected. New applications will include fixed wireless internet access for homes, outdoor broadcast applications without the need for broadcast vans, and greater connectivity for people on the move. Virtual and augmented reality will be accessible by everyone. Virtual reality provides connected experience that was not possible with earlier technologies. With the 5G and virtual reality, one will be able to travel to a favorite city, watch a live football match with the feeling of being on the ground, to inspect a real estate and walk through a new home, all from the comfort of your couch. 5G will keep us connected in tomorrow's smart cities, smart homes, and smart schools, and enable opportunities that we have not even thought of. Such is the great potential of 5G technology. 5G technology is expected to create a wealth of about $4 trillion, 4 trillion US dollars all over the world, and more than 20 million jobs. To make this happen, greater cooperation and collaborative efforts are needed amongst academia, industries, and government bodies. Thus, realizing the importance and potential applications of 5G, SRM University, Andhra Pradesh is planning to establish a center for 5G technologies involving industries and government agencies. I'm quite happy that our colleagues of the Department of ECE have taken the excellent initiative to organize the webinar on 5G looking into the future. I wish the workshop all the success. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Now I request Dr. Omji to introduce the speaker, Dr. M.H. Kohli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Uday, for giving me an opportunity to introduce our first speaker for today's session on evolution of wireless communication and overview of 5G. Our speaker has an experience of more than 35 years in the field of telecommunication and information technology. He is a well-known personality across the globe due to his various contributions in the area of communication systems. He was head of wireless communication division at CDOT, head of telecom and networking SBU at DSQ Software, and technical director at Alcatel-Lucent Technologies, India. He also served as technology advisor to Validas Technology USA. Additionally, he was conference convener of several conferences and seminars across the globe. He was the organizing committee chairman for IRSI India. He is the past chairman of IETE Bangalore Center during the years 1998 to 2000. IEEE Bangalore Center has received the Best Center Award for 2 years under his chairmanship. He is a distinguished fellow of IETE and consultant to TSDSI. He obtained his PhD from IIT Bombay and an independent technology consultant. Therefore, without any further delay, I would like to invite Dr. M.H. Corey for sharing his valuable knowledge and experience with us. Please welcome Dr. M.H. Corey.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for giving this opportunity for me to participate in this interesting conference. I'm so glad that I was able to meet Dr. Narayan Rao after a long time. We have had opportunity to work with him in Governing Council of IET for many years. It's almost more than 10-20 years we have worked together in various capacities. So it's very nice to meet him. And also thanks to Dr. Uday, with whom I was closely interacting when he was in Indian Institute of Science. Thanks to everyone, and I'm glad that Dr. Day and Dr. Swami will also be speaking after this. So that has made my job a lot easier because they are the present experts in this domain of 5G. So I will be talking briefly about, I was asked to talk on evolution of wireless. So I'll just briefly give about the wireless communications and then a little bit about some overview of 5G. But I think most of the details about the 5G, I think Dr. Day and Dr. Swami will be covering. I just want to share my
Please check it, share screen is there. Yeah.
Is it visible now? Yeah, okay, thanks.
Please make it as a full screen. So slideshow.
Yeah. But now it's okay? Yeah, I think it's good. Thanks. I just want to speak about wireless communication systems. Some of you are coming, admit, okay. Some few screen things are coming up. Yeah, I think now if the screen is visible, my slides are visible, I'll go ahead. Always, which I mention is wireless is an expression of freedom because that gives that amount of freedom which any other communication forms doesn't give. That's the major advantage of having this wireless communications compared to other forms of communications, the wired communications. The wired communication, excellent, huge bandwidth, all the advantages, but it's tied up. It has an umbilical cord, it ties you up. So you're always limited to the place where it is coming. So wireless gives you that freedom. That freedom is the most essential thing and the advantage of wireless communications. Just to give you, yeah, it's taking a little time.
So there will be, so please go up and see that there should be annotation is there, mute annotation, your screen sharing. Go up there, there will be some mute annotation option is there, please do that.
Okay, okay. So what I just wanted to mention here is, sorry. Okay, Wireless communications, just to keep you informed of wireless communication, we talk of great things that we have been doing. It's digital wireless communication. You can see this is the oldest form of wireless communications. Then we can see this. In case you didn't have wireless communication, this is the kind of chaotic situation you will end up with. This is little exaggerated. There are other technologies which will take care of it, but nevertheless, just to drive home the point, the advantage of wireless communication, this shows this, and probably, contestably, this is probably the first mobile wireless communication system long back. Just to respect the people who have contributed to this wireless communications, we have Jesse Bose, and then we have Marconi. Now coming to wireless communication, when we mean wireless communications, it's a whole range of communications. It's not necessarily the mobile communications which we talk, it's mobile communications, but wireless communications, you could have just a walkie-talkie or line of sight communications, point-to-point communications, single channel, various fixed, nomadic, mobile, structured, cellular, non-cellular, ad hoc, near field communications, body communications, the whole range of personal area networks, Wi-Fi, which is local area networks, and then wide area networks, and various communication systems which are possible. I'll not get into all of these things. I'll be confining only to the wide area networks of mobile communications, only some few parts of it. But one should recognize that when we say wireless communications, it's a whole range of communications. Most of the people who are familiar, or some of the things which people are familiar, is the personal area networks we routinely use, which is the Bluetooth and Zigbee, some of these things which come under the standards of 802.15 standards. And then the other one, which is most of the people use at home, particularly now, is the Wi-Fi networks, which is known as the wireless local area network. Wi-Fi is a specific term which is used, but it's WLAN, wireless local area network, which comes under the standard of 802.11. And unfortunately, they have made it into an alphabet soup by using the alphabets very haphazardly, A, B, G, N, A, C, X. And now there are new standards which are coming up, known as the AZ, BA, BB, BC, BD. And also at 60 gigahertz, the 802.11, AD, AY, and subsequently. So these are various other wireless communication systems. And in the mobile communication itself, we can have the femto, mobile ad hoc networks, EVDO, ultra mobile broadband, WCDMA. I'm sorry, it's moving to. So we have this HSTPA, those are the third generation communication systems, the WiMAX, the fourth generation communication, and we are moving into the fifth generation communication systems. And of course, the large area coverage by satellites, of course, we have the low Earth orbit and other kinds of satellites which are available. And technologies, I just listed out some of them here, right from the access technologies to duplexing technologies to MIMOs, the beamforming, software-defined radio, cognitive radios, and various communication systems. And somehow my slides are moving, it's out of my control. Okay, so let me give this. These are the global wireless standards. This is an old one. As I have already mentioned, personal area networks, local area networks, it's the coverage area. If you want to classify according to the areas, then you can have global wireless standards. These are the standards. And then this is the first paper on cellular communication system. I just want to emphasize the aspect of cellular communication. Mobile communication system is that you should be able to mobile and have the communication. But how do you make sure that resources which are utilized properly? So the first paper on how do you make it into a cellular communication, the first paper from the Bell Labs, the Lucent, which I was associated, was in 1947. Imagine the first patent came in 1947, and subsequently, though there was not too much of technology which was able to support that, so it was being used. It was not used, but subsequently only around 80s it came up. And this is the basic concept of cellular communication. Everyone knows that. You make it into cells, reuse the frequency or reuse the resources, and then you will have to have the provision to make sure that the handovers happen, locate the person where one is, and that's the beauty of these cellular communication systems. So now let's look at, as we are familiar with these Gs, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G communications. Approximately, as you can see, from 1980s, every decade, we have moved from one communication, one generation to another generation to another generation. Just to briefly, most of you are familiar, but just to briefly trace, the first generation communication system was voice calls, and then we moved into digital, and then mobile broadband and various things. And there is another one slide which gives a better way of doing this one. 1980s, analog voice. The standards at that time, there were several standards. Europe, every country had a standard. So it's AMPS, NMIT, TAX, and then various standards. And in the second generation, some amount of consolidation was attempted to happen, and then we came with IS-95 in US, which used code division multiple access, and then GSM in Europe and in India. And the improvements over that, which came into the third generation communication system, the WCDMA, the HSPA, CDMA 2000, EVDO, these were the standards, and focus shifted to data. It was moving from efficient voice to focus shifted to, earlier we were looking at predominantly at voice, and in the third generation communication system, we moved into the data communication system. And then the fourth generation communication system became mobile broadband, and the standards which came, I have some more slides on that. I'll come to that subsequently. And then we are moving into the fifth generation communication system, though in India, we are not started commercial operations as of yet. Just to get an idea of what is it that it is changing, if you can look at it, the standards as well as the data rate over a time period, you can just see that we have moved from the earlier ones known as GSM, GPRS, General Packet Radio Services, around 100 kbps, we have moved into EDGE, CDMA 2000, Universal Mobile Telecommunication Standards, which is UMTS. Then parallelly on the other side, on the evolution data only or data optimized, and then we moved into high-speed downlink packet access, high-speed uplink packet access, high-speed packet access plus, and then EVDO, REV-B, REV-C, and WiMAX, and LTE. And now we have further moved on to, but you can just see the data rate. It has been increasing and increasing and increasing. That's the technology which has moved. And then, of course, various access technologies, just to give you an idea of, we moved from the frequency division multiple access to time division multiple access to code division multiple access. And then we turned back with the enhancement, something known as the orthogonal frequency division multiple access, that FDMA in its new avatar with excellent facilities, with the orthogonality built into it, we have now come to OFDMA. Just to give you an idea of this network architecture, this is the kind of thing, but why I have put it here is that you can see initially we were moving all data piggybacking on the voice. It was all circuit switch networks, but subsequently we moved to a generation where voice used to go on the circuit switch and the data would come on the packet switch. You can see here two sections. where data would come to the gateway on, and then voice is on the circuit switch network. This is up to the third generation communication systems. Then we moved in the high-speed packet access. Initial thoughts of MIMO was introduced, interference cancelling, higher order modulation, continuous packet connectivity, all these things were introduced. But we moved from third generation to fourth generation communication system. We made significant changes. I'm trying to trace the changes which have happened than the technology per se. I'll not get into exact details of the technology, but one should appreciate the way in which we are moving from, we moved from third generation to fourth generation communication. We made some significant changes. And then subsequently, I'll mention that when we are moving from fourth generation to fifth generation, we have made large number of changes. The whole approach changes. So in the third generation to fourth generation communication system, third generation system used code division multiple access, that is the WCDMA air interface. It was circuit switch and packet switch. As I mentioned, voice used circuit switching, data used packet switching, and on the and various changes which made. And in the fourth generation, we changed the access from CDMA to orthogonal frequency division multiple access, OFDM, which gives significant, enormous advantages. So that's one major change which happened. And also after that, we moved into, of course, higher bandwidths. We were using at one point in third generation communication system, 2 Mbps data, which we could support. But then we moved into third generation communication system. We were using around 5 megahertz bandwidth. Then in fourth generation systems, the provision was available up to 20 megahertz bandwidth. So the shift was that for higher data applications, we have made changes in orthogonal frequency division multiple access, and also in the core network, we are moving from circuit switching to packet switching, and then certain other things, technology improvements were introduced, which is known as the MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. Multiple input, multiple output is one of the major important changes which increase the spectral efficiency. It's simply, instead of using one antenna for transmitting and one antenna for receiving, we added multiple antennas. So multiple input and multiple output we were using. And then you can just see here that we moved from edge to UMTS to HSPA, that is high speed packet access, to LTE. We increased the data rate and reduced certain latency aspects of it. This is just, WiMAX was one of the other technologies. I just want to mention here, for the fourth generation communication system, actually there were 3 contending technologies. One is known as the LTE and LTE Advanced. The other one was the WiMAX, and one more known as the UMB Ultra Mobile Broadband, which had an infant mortality. It was never accepted by anyone, though technology was good. WiMAX was also an excellent technology. It survived for a while, and now it is used for some exclusive proprietary applications, but it's also almost gone. The only LTE is the technology which is recognized. LTE Advanced is the one which is extensively used as the fourth generation communication systems by the IMT 2000. Then subsequently, as I mentioned, that we moved into the fourth generation communication system. These are the building blocks. These are the building blocks for which I already mentioned. On the air interface, we had orthogonal frequency division multiple access. That's the driving force. And then of course, the multiple input, multiple output, and a host of antenna related technologies which enhance the spectral efficiency. And then on the architecture of the fourth generation communication system, it was not a hierarchical architecture. It was made into a kind of distributed architecture. And then of course, it's an IP based architecture. and then IP-based core networks. So these are the major changes which happened in the building blocks for this one. And you can see here in the architecture, there is an X2 interface which has been introduced in the 4th generation communication system, which gives a communication between the base stations instead of going hierarchically from the handset to the BTS to BSC to MSC and then coming back all the way down. There was some interfaces which were defined in between X2 interface and certain other things, which gave the advantage of this architecture. So we moved into LTE, as I mentioned, OFDM, MIMO, and then so the flat architecture in the core networks. These are the three driving forces which gave the robust modulation, increased the link capacity, flat scalable architecture in the core network. This just gives you an idea of how OFDM and OFDMI access is used for multi-users. I'll not get into OFDM, I'm sure you all know this. But this picture demonstrates to you this multiple input, multiple output, and the architecture here, the distributed architecture. And then if you have multiple antennas, how you are increasing the link capacity. In fact, it's a very fascinating subject of multiple input, multiple output. It's a class of its own. It's multiple antennas you use, and then it could be initially multiple antennas was used for diversity, that is for availability. It was used to increase the availability or reliability of a system. You could have multiple antennas. It's not absolutely new thing which came up, but it was being used as in point-to-point microwave communication systems. Dr. Narendra Rao knows, and everyone knows that it has been used extensively earlier, the space diversity and frequency diversity which was being used. That is to make sure that the reliability, if one fails, you can take over into the other one. You had multiple antennas receiving. If there is a blockade in one, you could receive in the other one. But it has been extended to, and it's been refined to such an extent that we have multiple antennas for transmitting and receiving, both for increasing the availability as well as increasing the capacity. So you can increase the spectral efficiency of that one, that you can beautifully manage these things. It stems from the fact that if you have multiple antennas and then you are transmitting, the reflections happen, then you can always find out that if it is something like, if you have 3-4 unknowns, and if you have only one equation, you will not be unambiguously solve that equation. But if you have multiple equations and multiple variables, so you create these multiple equations by creating multiple antennas. So that's the beauty of that, and that could be used, extended for many other things. In 5th generation, that has been extended to a further refinement of that. I will come to that one subsequently. We use this. Then we have here transmission over that, and then you can get a rich diversity of this.
Sir, 1 second, sir. Uday here.
Yeah.
Could you please go to the option? There will be that annotate option is there. Go there and disable annotation, because a lot of problems created by the students.
Yeah.
I am just closing this. You go there.
Stop push.
Stop annotation.
Stop annotation.
View options. Check that view option. Then there should be some stop annotation should be there.
Stop share is there.
Stop share not. There should be some annotation. Stop annotation should be there.
Stop annotate. Yeah.
The students are creating some problem. Stop annotation, please do that, sir.
Not able to.
Everyone is mailing me. Vasu, please take over and do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Vasu, please do that.
Yes, sir. I'm doing, sir. Actually, before hosting that meeting, we have to do, sir. In between trying, sir.
Please do something.
Okay, sir.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sure, sir.
Also, if some of the students are not interested, why don't
they can
you
leave.
Release them? Why don't you release them?
They could leave.
Yes, I think it is better that way. maybe they are not interested in the topic, and it will be okay.
Also, did you get that option? Vasu,
Sir,
did you get that option of the mute annotation?
no, sir. In settings, we have to close the meeting and make.
No, it's not possible.
Start.
Again, it's very difficult.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay.
Okay, please, sir, please continue, sir. We'll do something.
Yeah. That's okay. Oh,
You just find out, Vasu, you just find out the people who are doing that, just remove them.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. I'm checking. Sir.
And note down their name and just remove them.
Okay, sir.
oh.
Sir, please continue, sir.
Yeah. It's paused somewhere. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I got it back. So I was mentioning about how these MIMO channels are being used to increase both availability as well as the capacity. How do we increase this? So this is being used extensively in that you can see it's a combination of MIMO technology could be used for beamforming, that you could form beams in the direction in which you want. This is not actually a new technology. It is exactly borrowed from the radar technology of phased array radars. In the phased array radars, you have multiple antennas, and then you feed the signal, and then you can track. That is electronic steering of the beam. That concept has been used in the communication technology, borrowed from there, and then refined it to an extent that we could have beam which you can move from one direction to another direction, and also have multiple beams. And also you can do that. This variation of the beam direction can be done by changing the phase fed to each of the antennas.
Yes.
But you also have another parameter where the amplitude is there, that if you control the amplitude and phase, you can shape the beam. So you can create null beams, and null beams is created in radar for certain things, anti-jamming properties and other things. But you borrow that same advantage here, that to just null the interfering signals which are coming, which signals which you don't want. So to increase your signal to noise ratio. So those concepts have been very effectively used, which initially was used in the 4th generation communication system and has been extensively refined into the next 5th generation communication system. I will come to that. These are some figures in which we had done some simulations to show that what is the spectrum efficiency you can increase in the various forms of MIMOs and things like that. Just to give you an idea, to increase the throughput, reduce the latency, how MIMO could be worked on that. And in the 4th generation communication systems, the basic structure, it has a resource grid, it has a 15 kilohertz frequency separations, and then one can have 12 subcarriers of 4.5 milliseconds. I'll not get into details of that, but you can see here that you can do, and the generic frame structure, which was defined for the 4th generation LTE Advanced communication systems. And then subsequently, we moved from LTE to LTE Advanced. It still comes under the 4th generation, it's 4th generation communication. Actually, people say LTE Advanced is the real 4th generation communication system. There are several interesting features which have been added, something known as the asymmetric transmission bandwidth, layered OFDMA, advanced multi-cell transmissions, enhanced multi-antenna transmissions, support of large bandwidth, that is things which have been done. And this chart gives you a comparison of what are the major differences between LTE and LTE Advanced in mobility, in coverage, in scalable bandwidths, and in capacity. Some of the features, asymmetric transmission bandwidth, you can have, and then layered OFDMA, semi-persistent scheduling, And another important aspect which came up in the process of when we were developing into next generation communication system is known as the heterogeneous networks. There is some femto networks and small cells. Dr. Uday is an expert in the area of femto networks. He has done his PhD in that area. And then where you embed a cell within a cell. In a macro cell, there is a micro cell which is embedded in there. This is primarily came out of the requirement that inside the house, you don't get the coverage. Most of the time you have problem. So how do you resolve that one? From that it has come that how a cell within a cell, how do you manage the interference related issues? So this is a very interesting concept. And then as you can see, this requirement for bandwidth or high data rate is unending. We are always in need of high data rate, high data rate, high data rate. And that is what we have been working on in the first to second. I mean, first to second was analog to digital, but second to third to fourth. Simple concentration was on increasing this one. What technologies we used is a different thing. Very, very interesting technologies were used, but the concentration was on enhancing this, enhancing the data rate. And the reason is very, very simple. We are using extensively the data. It's simple example could be that if you're using a mobile phone for a camera and then you took it at 2 megapixel, and for the same photo which you want to take, you take it at now I think there is a 40 megapixel camera which is available if you want to use that for the same purpose, but for a higher resolution, very clarity and other things. And for in this COVID-19 situation that you want to use for video conferences and such applications, and at high resolutions you want a clarity, then the data rate obviously increases not linearly but exponentially. That's how it is increasing. It's increasing, and then we need to cater for that one. The network it should be in a position to handle that. So this is what is driving this. And so we are moving into the 5th generation communication. This is the logo. And then as Dr. Narayan Rao mentioned already, the basic 3 dimensions and principles on which the 5th generation was, of course, obviously enhancing the mobile data rate. We wanted to enhance the mobile data rate. We have that is one of the primary objective of the 5th generation communication system. But moving from 3rd to 4th, that was the objective. But moving from 4th to 5th generation communication system, that's not the only objective. There were 3 dimensions in which the 5th generation communication system. One, obviously, is the enhanced mobile broadband, increase the data rate. How do we increase? Technologies, we will look at it. But that's the objective. The second objective was massive machine type communication system, which Dr. Narayan mentioned already on the second type and the third type also. It is simply because there was another parallelly technology which was developing, applications were developing, which is known as the Internet of Things, IoT, and massive IoT. IoT and massive IoT was developing. And how do you interconnect? IoT, you need to connect through wireless. There is no option. You have to use wireless as a communication, linking all this huge number of sensors and other devices which you want to connect. Of course, there are other contending technologies. You could use Wi-Fi, you could use Zigbee, you could use LoRa, you could use other versions of Bluetooth and so many other NB-IoT and various other communication technologies are available. But in the standards of this mobile communication system, there was some attempt made in the 4th generation communication to connect all these IoT devices, but it was an afterthought. But in 5th generation communication, right from the beginning of the standards being developed, it was tailored made for this massive machine type communication systems. The advantage of using 5G for this connection is the wider reach compared to Wi-Fi or any other communications which have limited range of coverage. 5G has, or any of these mobile communication systems has extensive wide range where you can connect. your sensors which are putting in an agricultural application, that it is distributed over a large range, it becomes difficult for other types of communication systems to come. Of course, one can always do a hybrid combination of Wi-Fi kind of extensions or other communications, and in conjunction with this, using this as a backhaul part of it. Of course, various hybrid versions are available, but massive machine type communication was a requirement, and it has been very nicely built into the standard right from the beginning, such that it's an optimized solution. And the third one is, of course, the ultra reliable low latency communication. It has to be extremely reliable and low latency, as he rightly mentioned, thinking in terms of 1 millisecond latency. So these are the applications. These are the three objectives with which the 5th generation communication system started. So these are some slides I want to use, different forms of same thing which I had mentioned. This is a slide which I think anyone giving a 5G talk, you will find that this people will use. Other day, 3GPP chairman of one of the working groups was mentioning, this is a slide which has been beaten to death, that it has been used so extensively that everyone sees this. But it's this objectives are the same: massive IoT, low latency, enhanced mobile broadband. Three objectives, various applications are given here: smart city cameras, various other applications, driverless cars, self-driving cars, and various applications. People are working on enhanced mobile broadband. This gives you another view of the same thing, of what are the different objectives one has. How much data rate, what is the latency, what is the network energy usage, coverage, all aspects of this one. This is another beautiful way of putting the applications, the critical IoT applications, enhanced mobile broadband applications, and massive machine type communication. Different applications are mentioned here. This is the 5th generation communication system. Requirements: we want 1000 times capacity, 100 typical rate, reduced latency up to 1 millisecond, huge number of connected devices. These are the three dimensions. How do we, let's look at each of them, that what is that we are doing to meet these objectives? What is that new which we are going to do in 5th generation communications, which make sure that these objectives are met? Of course, we want to increase the capacity. Some of the options are, you can add cell sites, add sectors. We were using, it's an omnidirectional antenna, or we use 3 sectors or 6 sectors. We increase that, add carriers, and there is something known as the carrier aggregation, where even if it is not contiguous frequency, if you have disjointed, whether you can do a carrier aggregation, so to increase the capacity. And of course, also you can use higher order modulations, which is the most obvious method, of course, with the penalty of your coverage area, distance, and then what is your DB not how much you need for covering this for a particular modulation. We were using higher order modulation of QAM, 64 QAM, 128 QAM, 256 QAM, now going up to 1024 QAM, and still further people are thinking in terms of that. And multiple input, multiple output, smart antennas, software defined radios, various other capacities. So key technologies which drive this 5th generation communication systems are known as the new radio. Radio has been redefined. Massive MIMO, instead of having multiple input, multiple output of some few antennas, massive number of antennas being deployed, which is known as the massive MIMO, millimeter waves, beamforming, dense networks using and smaller cells, active smart reconfigurable antennas, heterogeneous networks, full duplex communication systems, mobile edge computing, artificial intelligence and machine learning, network slicing, NFV, network function virtuality and software-defined networks. I think luckily, the other speakers are going to cover some of the important aspects of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and also network function virtuality related issues. These are very, very critical factors in the 5th generation communication. I'm looking forward to hearing their talks. So these are the driving forces in the 5th generation communication system. Radio has been defined, new radio. I'm never comfortable with the term we use, new radio, because after 5 years, you still call new radio, which is being phased out. But nevertheless, we are using it as a new radio. So new radio access technology for the next generation. New frequency bands have been identified. As Dr. Narendra mentioned, we are not using only frequencies in the low frequency bands. I mean, when I mean low frequency bands, it is only 1 gigahertz, 2 gigahertz, 3 gigahertz. It's 5th generation communication system defines as below 6 gigahertz and above 6 gigahertz. So typically, most of the people are thinking in terms of is 3.3 to 4 gigahertz in that range, in this range. And also, of course, in the millimeter wave. It's not exactly millimeter wave because millimeter wave starts at 30 gigahertz, but we can flexibly use that term because 24 gigahertz, 26 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz is being used for 5G applications. So it is the millimeter wave applications. And also now there is effort which is being made to get frequencies in the mid band of around 5 to 6 gigahertz, 6 to 7 gigahertz. And then beamforming support is given, flexible radio parameters have been defined. Here, the waveform and numerology of the frame structures, it has been defined. Initially, in the OFDM, it was 15 kilohertz. The spacing, subcarrier spacing was 15 kilohertz, but here it has been, in the 5th generation communication system, it has various options have been given because we are moving into millimeter wave frequencies. The bandwidth is large. So it has been defined as 15, 30, 60, 120, 240, 480 kilohertz. Subcarrier spacing has also been defined and various other things which have been given here. And then we can also do this combination of the 5th generation and 4th generation standalone and non-standalone definitions have been given. I'm sorry, someone is obliterating this slide. We have the new radio working jointly, but you can see the coverage areas in 1 gigahertz, less than 1 gigahertz, around 700 megahertz. Of course, in India, there was a problem in auctioning of the 700 megahertz, but typically around less than 6 gigahertz and above 1 gigahertz, the one which is used around 3.4 gigahertz, 3.6 gigahertz. That is where you get higher propagation, but compensated by massive MIMO and beamforming. Coverage is fairly decent. So this is a pretty good range in the frequency in which we work. But using around 24 gigahertz, the LTE is not ideal for that one. So it is defined, it is done in 5th generation communication system. So we need to do this massive MIMO networks and beamforming. These are the two important technologies that instead of using few antennas as MIMO, you use large number of antennas, and then you have the ability to do the beamforming. These are the ones which give the major advantage. Massive MIMO, I'll just, you can just, in terms of the multiple antenna technology, you can increase the capacity by additional channels you can do, or you can increase the signal to noise ratio, or you can reconfigure the beam adaptive antennas MIMO. So these are the basic principles on which this multiple antenna technology is based on. So one can use that, and you can see here, if someone can remove that obliteration which is coming in, you can see here multiple input, multiple output, 2x2 antennas you can hear, but you can increase the capacity to make it an active antenna. The antenna technology, as such, antenna is the same thing. It's a passive device. But what you put before the antenna and where do you put that antenna, I mean active device, that decides whether it becomes active and smart antenna. Active antenna here, radio is embedded with the base station antenna, and then you can increase and do a lot of things with the help of these parameters. And then you can reconfigure the antenna beam. As I already mentioned, you can see a linear array of antennas here, and then you can have active antennas embedded into the base station antenna, and then we can work around that to get major advantage. Or these are reconfigurable beam antennas. And this is the picture which gives you an idea of the massive number of multiple input, multiple output. As you can see in the previous picture, you had seen that each of those antennas in an array, you have multiple antennas there. It's an antenna array. And several of such antennas have been incorporated here. And the number of antennas has become really massive. And also you can see, appreciate that each of these radiating element, you can have a vertical polarization as well as a horizontal polarization. So double the capacity and then you can use this. So this is the massive MIMO which gives advantage in case of fifth generation communication system. This and the beamforming combination of that gives, and you know the millimeter wave frequency has large bandwidth. So one can use this millimeter wave frequencies, below 6 gigahertz and above 6 gigahertz millimeter wave is used. The radio access, the fifth generation standard defines it is standalone and non-standalone. You can work in collaboration with LTE or independently, and most of the millimeter wave 5G will be a standalone radios. The frequency definition, FR1, which is given 450 to 6 gigahertz, and FR2, which is 24.25 gigahertz to 52.6 gigahertz. And now the definition is being extended further. So the second part of this is this, the massive machine type communications. I'll not get into details of this one. I'll leave it at this. Just mentioning that the number of devices that have to be connected is large, extremely large, that has to be done, and the latency related for critical applications have to be taken care of. But how do we take care of this latency related activities? How do we reduce this? There are a few technologies. I'll just briefly mention about it. I'll not get into details of that. One is very important. It's not exclusively for the fifth generation communication. It has been used by other technologies for various other applications, but the mobile edge communication is a critical factor here. You bring this, as you know, cloud is where most of the action is happening. You have a public cloud, you have an enterprise cloud, but you will have to also have an edge cloud which is put. Mobile edge cloud is where you do, and mobile edge computing is very, very critical in the fifth generation communication system, primarily to ensure that our latency issues are taken care. So we'll have to make sure that mobile edge computing is built into the fifth generation communication system, and it's for both and in combination of that, I'll not transgress into the other speakers' domain, AI and ML in fifth generation communication. It's not 5GB is not the data. It's the term which is now being used. So many acronyms keep coming up. This is 5G and beyond. They call it as 5GB. So this is very, very critical, because fourth generation communication networks are reactive. Then we need to ensure that there is a machine learning part is built into the fifth generation communication system. Of course, we will hear in the next talk, but my interest here in this fifth generation communication system is, I'm sorry, I'm losing control. Yeah. fifth generation and machine learning go in hand in hand. Just to give you an idea of why do we need this fifth generation communication system is when we use massive MIMO, huge number of antennas, and also when we use beamforming technologies. We can just take an example of one challenge is building these systems, 128 antennas all working together form 32 beams. And you need to schedule those 4 beams in a specified format in a specific time. You're talking in terms of very low latency. And then you have beams. It's not that I have a sectoral antenna or omnidirectional antenna which is transmitting, so I don't have to worry. Here I'm forming a beam, and then I want to decide which is the optimum beam which I have to consider for the best applications. And then there is a latency requirement. So it is not that I have a massive computation which is being done in the cloud that I decide run a huge algorithm of finding out and then doing that one. It has to be done using immediately. I'll have to do that. So this is where the effect of artificial intelligence and machine learning comes in, at least from my application point of view. Machine learning and AI for beam forming, it is very critical. When you form this beam, these are the parameters which we use. The beam index, reference signal, distance, received power, position, speed, channel quality indicator, CQI, all these parameters decide how do I decide which beam. These are the parameters. So I have so many number of beams, and which is the optimum which I want to use in a very limited time. Then I had to use lot more sophisticated techniques, both mobile edge computing as well as these machine learning and artificial beam artificial intelligence techniques have to be used to do this. But I'm open to listen to from Dr. Day about further on these machine learning applications for this one. This is the beamforming technology, whether you have analog or hybrid or digital beamforming. And then you have, this is just one example which Ericsson and Vodafone did, that how do you reduce the amount of power that is consumed using a machine learning algorithm. And it's beautifully, it was used that delivered 14% saving in the energy consumption. And I'll not get into this, whether it's a supervised learning or unsupervised learning. I just want to conclude with three. One aspect is that on the core network also, it's very, very critical fifth generation communication system. It uses network slicing, network function virtuality, and software defined networks. I think on the virtuality part of it, Dr. Swami will be speaking on that one. I'll not go into, but network slicing is a very interesting concept, which is going to be used very effectively in the fifth generation communication system. And then how do we define virtuality and software defined networks? Just to give you an idea of roadmap, 3GPP is the body which decides on the standards. It's used in terms of releases, release 15, 16, 17. These are the 3 releases on which the most of the fifth generation communication system is dependent. Probably 18, 19 also will probably fall in the fifth generation only before we move to 6G. 6G is not defined. Everyone is talking about 6G. It's nebulous. There is nothing. If some important technology development is done, it's going to be still in the 5G unless it is dramatically totally different and after probably a decade or some such thing. So release 15, 16, 17, these are the timelines on which it is given here. And then you can also see what is to be expected in release 15, release 16, and release 17, the fifth generation. This is 3GPP has decided, has planned on this. This is what doing on that. And then I just want to mention one slide and close this. There is a society or standards organization called Telecommunication Standards Development Society India, TSDSI. This is working on standards for telecommunication, and this is the body which represents India in ITU and then decides on what is the requirement Earlier, we didn't have that. Everyone, what they decided, we had to take that one. Now there is a body which works on this India-specific applications, puts forth it in ITU and 3GPP and ETSI and various other places. They have the representation. They work closely and work on that. This is, of course, it is jointly supported by Devotee, MEIT, and other organizations. I just wanted people to know that there is lots of people who are working in the industry. I'm sure Dr. Samsung and Geo and all are people who are contributing in making sure that Indian requirements are put forth in the international standards bodies. So this is what I just want to conclude my talk with just one quote which you see in the Bell Labs. It's written there. If anyone visits Murray Hill Bell Labs, the earlier Lucent and AT&T, but now it's part of Nokia. In the lobby, you can see that leave the beaten track occasionally and drive into the woods. You will be certain to find something you have never seen before. So don't think that what has been done is the only thing. There are so many new things. If you have an open mind, you can always find new, interesting, and wonderful things. And in the domain of wireless communications, there are so many possibilities, and you can always find that and then contribute. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Questions, please. Any questions from all?
In case you don't have right now a question, I have put my email ID. Feel free to send it to me. I'm always available to answer if I know. The good thing is that even if I don't know, I know people who know this, so I'll get the answer for you. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So you can just unshare your screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for disturbance in this. Some people are annotating unnecessarily. Please kindly don't do that. Now, next speaker, I request Dr. Anirban to introduce Dr. Alok Day. So, Anirban, please do. Go ahead. Meanwhile, I'll just check my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Uday. After the fascinating introductory speech by Professor Rao, our beloved Bobisi sir, describing the various applications for 5G, the advantages of it, and how it is going to change the face of human life, Dr. Kori's presentation on the evolution of wireless communication and overview of 5G basically provided us with a detailed and very informative session describing about massive MIMO, femtocells, beamforming, etc., and set the tone for the rest of the session. Thank you, Dr. Kori, and thank you, Professor Rao. Now it's time to look further into some more of the contemporary technologies that has been creating a buzz for some time now, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, etc., and how it fits into the realm of 5G, and who better than our next speaker to speak on it. Our next speaker, throughout his life, has been crafting core technologies spanning from mobile devices to radar systems. Currently, he is building driving solutions in the intersection space of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, big data. He's a missionpreneur with a dream to make India an R&D hub. In Samsung, he blends in-house innovation with open innovation from universities and startups. He inspires young engineers to create products, solutions, and services for a better connected world, imbibing principles of deep technology, consumer experience, and social inclusion. He's a staunch believer of take on SIAR, take on value, and take for all. Let us all welcome Dr. Alok Day, SPPC to Samsung India for the next talk. Welcome, Dr. Dev.
Thank you, Dr. Anirban. Professor Narayana Rao, so thanks for the invitation. Dr. Uday, pleasure to be meeting here in SRM and IEEE seminar. So today we are talking about 5G, looking into future, and in particular segment, just we had from Dr. Corey, evolutions of wireless communications. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about AI in 5G, but just to take the baton, as he said, you know, there is a common slide that everybody uses and it has been bitten to death. And if it has not died, let's go to the next slide. So yes, so on the left-hand side, as you can see, there are three important aspects of 5G. I'm going to talk about 5 or 6 slides on just to set the stage a little bit more on 5G before I talk about the AI in 5G, that you'll be able to appreciate. And when I talk, you will also see what are these applications and how it fits into the overall scheme of things. So first of all, you see this enhanced mobile broadband, and there is a peak rate, there is an edge rate in the cells. You have an ultra reliable and low latency. Why it is important? Because you want to make the systems very interactive. You will see a lot of applications that requires that inactivity and interactivity. Then you have a third type, which is a massive machine type communications. IoT, we talked about it. It can be done in 3.5G, 4G, but 5G would enable, because we are now talking about a new parameter, which is connections per square kilometer. We didn't have that. And so far, the whole communication is about people-to-people communications. But now, for the first time, we are talking about people to devices and devices to devices communication. So we are into a new paradigm, human to machine, machine to machine, and human to human obviously is there. That is the 5G paradigm. On the right-hand side, this hexagonal or octagonal kind of diagrams, or even decagonal diagrams that you will see by many, that talks about not just these three main things, but also there is a peak data rate, for example. You have a network energy efficiency. We talk about green communications. So is it in 5G per user, we are going to be using lesser energy? That's a measure for that. Area traffic capacity, because it will be dense. 5G will not only be a macro level, but also small cells and micro cells are getting involved in that. There are different mobility speeds. So bottom line, what you see is how the 3GPP standards are evolving from, I have shown here March 2016 to December 19, and we are going into 20. The release 14, 15, and 16 in 3GPP standards have been talking about 5G. When you go to release 17, which has started and will be in September 2020, we were targeting, but it may be a little bit taking longer to get that, where machine type communications are also coming. What you see just above that is a timeline in which Samsung, I joined Samsung in 2011 and started 5G research, MAC research in our Bangalore lab, and we set it up. And today we are talking 2020, 9 years, 10 years. It takes a generation to build, to develop, to design, to deploy, and to be commercially beneficial. So some of the points that you see, Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, where in the Seoul, South Korea, we started testing in the Olympic stadiums, different kinds of it. Then you have launched in 2018 December with 3 operators together with the government support in South Korea. We launched it for a B2B applications. We looked into a car, auto ancillary companies and see how the products could be built, or is the productions, is any defective. You can spot it immediately and then throw out the results instead of building that whole automotive. And then last year beginning, we launched in Korea as commercials, and now it has gone into various operators in US and many other countries. So going to the next slide, this gives you a picture of how 5G connectivity node for smart city. Can you put the next slide, please? Yes. This tells you the connections between IoT and 5G, because there are these street lights, for example. This will become very, very important in future. The street lights would play a very, very critical role, as you know, in our home, the router plays. These would start communicating, and you have the access units, you have the core units, and this gigabit traffic can be a backhaul, as we know in 5G, but it can also be penultimate mile, I call it in the smart city, or last mile in smart home. In dense urban areas, you have an LTE small cell. I give you on the right-hand side some computations, 5 times 240 megabits per second. That's an LTE small cell. You can have public Wi-Fi, 5 times 300 megabits per second. Lots of IoT sensors in agricultural, in city side, waste management, intelligent surveillance, CCTV cameras that can take you 10 into 24 megabits per second, 240 megabits per second. And then one more important thing that's going to be coming, very popular, digital signage everywhere to display, to educate, to make people aware, to advertise, and 5 into 24 megabits per second adds up to 120 megabits per second. So even if you do not have yourself a gigabit traffic, you can add all these up, and penultimate mile 5G could be used. Next slide, please. So I give you one examples of V2X. This is not yet there, but in 2 years' time, those who are in your second year, third year, you are studying, I would excite them, this connected car. The autonomous car is a different thing, but connected car is going to be reality, because you could get a lot of benefits from congestions and other things that is there. So I show here 4 different examples. The bottom right is connected traffic light. The traffic light would start communicating to the others. Many a times we travel and we say, we got a green light, but the next time I get a red light, and then red light, and then suddenly green light. But ideally, they should be synchronized. So the 5G could bring that communications and pause it at the right level, or could connect ahead to a traffic light, saying something to be stopped much longer. There is an ambulance passing. There could be a lot of interesting things built around this. Remote driving. I just saw a recent incident. Somebody sitting in Germany, he bulldozed a house in another country by sitting there. The bulldozer is in separate country, thousands of miles apart, but he's controlling from Germany, and that's the future of remote driving, monitoring, and controlling. High definition map update, you know, frequency of updates that could be much larger. And then vision, camera, LiDAR sharing. This is one interesting thing even we have done from Samsung. You know, for example, a big vehicle is going and you have a vehicle in the front, but I can't see that. I'm behind, I'm in the blue car. And the yellow car is ahead, and yellow car maybe at a different speed could come to the left. So it becomes a big vehicle's responsibility. And we have started showing at the back of this through a display that there is a car in the front. So if you want to overtake, be watchful and things like that. So there are many such applications that would be emerging in future. And AI, ML, DL plays a good role even at this application layer. 2 more slides to sum up on the 5G basic part of it, and then I enter into the AI discussions. So this is one launch that we did, an early 5G deployment. The slide is a bit old, so we have moved a lot from there. In April 2019, I said 2.5 million users in Korea. Today it is 5.5 million users. Samsung is the largest supplier for 5G base stations, and that time itself in the launch, we supplied so many of the base stations. And on the right side, I talked about some of those trials ongoing, but now those trials have happened. AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, they have chosen some of the cities, some in the New York, some in Chicago, some in the California, LA, and we have been testing quite a lot. Now, you may be wondering why this 5G and what is so big deal? Why do you need that? Just look at that Verizon speed test. 1.4 gigabits per second in Chicago that time. This is launch time. And with our S10 5G, now we have launched even S20. This is a year older, but look at the speed. There is a Stranger Things, there is a serial, and the entire first season on 4G, it took 1 hour, 16 minutes. And on 5G, it is 38 seconds. And this test is not done by us. This is an independent test. There is a bottom link that you could see. So the latency is ranging from 30 milliseconds down to 17 milliseconds on 5G, but look at the speed. So what takes an hour, I could do in minutes. That's the kind of difference between 4G and 5G, and the technology behind that, what has been built to add up to this kind of results. So next slide, please. This gives you till the end of 19, I don't have an update, but 55 commercial 5G networks in operations that has happened in different countries. We are yet to get in our country, and hopefully we'll soon get it, but look at the different spectrum, all continents almost, and there are operators that have launched. So sometimes we think that we are kind of ahead and we are still discussing, but 5G is built. Specs have been there. Obviously, there are rooms for further contributions, but it is kind of ongoing. And unfortunately, we're not able to have the Olympics 2020 this summer in Japan. That would have been a big launch for 5G from almost many vendors, many different technologies that were planned. So it's a big loss for us, but we are hoping that in 2021 summer, we could make that up. Next slide, please. That's the last slide highlighting here in the immersive services. And this is just to give you, again, broaden your mind. And if you are into the application side of it, services side of it, or even design, please look into these aspects, what's going on. First of all, the mobile devices, it used to be all rectangular devices and straight lines. That's no more the case. There is lots of bendable, flexible phones that have started coming. We have already launched a couple of good ones, at least 3 generations of them. You see on the right side, mobile cloud, because earlier people started doing on devices. Now we moved lots of operations into the cloud. And now we are making it hybrid because cloud is a cost and on-device powers are growing. So how can you connect them? So a lot of AI ML algorithms that you see, data privacy, data intelligence is lying between what can be done on device and what could be launched on the cloud. Then we have real-time interactive games. And this is where I was saying latency matters. Anything that's fast, a lot of blockchain operations, a lot of stock trading, a lot of interactive games, automotive, where you need to be able to monitor things. This is where the low latency plays a significant role. On the left side top, you see ubiquitous healthcare. We're trying to see, even through mobile, can we transport radiological diagrams, let's say ultrasound or X-ray, with the right precision remotely? And then remote surgeries, remote surgical operations supports, remote ubiquitous healthcare is in the plan. UHD video streaming. UHD we thought only we'll see on the TV, but now it's going to be coming on the mobiles from HD, VHD to UHD streaming. And many of the people that are in the lockdown mode knows and watching movies, such fast processing, fast download, and UHD quality is something that people are aspiring for. And in the middle bottom that you see, we are going through a different types of crisis now, but there are natural calamities like flood. And suddenly the first victim where we need more communications, but the first victim there is the communications, because the poles are down and flooded and short-circuited, and we can't even communicate. No charging, no electricity. So this becomes a big problem. And this is where the drones, if we can bring it, and the next generations between 5G and beyond, a lot of discussions that are ongoing beyond connected car is on this front, whereby can I form an ad hoc network of 5G with few drones and start communicating, if not for a broader region, but maybe a localized region, maybe a lagooned place that is isolated, insulated, and save these people from there. So there is a lot of services for good time, for bad time, on device and in cloud, on flat device, on flexible devices with low resolutions and high resolutions. And that's the spectrum of things that we will be covering. Obviously, 5G is meant for the high end, but it must cater to the low ends also. So we are looking into that. So with this, I think you have got a broad picture of very nice, 5G, how it is evolving. Now I'd like to go to the next part of my presentation. Dr. Uday, if you could help me showing the other slide deck. This, my colleague has also worked in UK, and I borrowed his slides to present. There is no point duplicating, so I give him the credit for all his thoughts. Wang Yu, and let's go to the next slide. And this is built last year, but I would be updating as I talk. Now, what you see here is your, just to start and transition from the previous to this, is what has changed is effectively we have these smartphones, and it is no more smartphones, but cars and cameras, surveillance cameras, beautiful other cameras, all together, they have started talking. Our end customers are no more just the customers, consumers, but also B2B things have started happening, business to business. Because as I told, smart city, smart building, offices, enterprises, they would also be a subscriber. And there is a specific segment that we are targeting, even online education, schools, smart schools. So B2B, B2B2C, and maybe B2B2X can be government, can be other things that are there, NGOs, all could be there. And the other aspect is, so far, the communication has moved into best efforts mode. We define some SLA, some QoS, but now it's becoming even customized SLA. It will be a personalized. I need these things. These are my 20 applications. Help me getting an optimal service in this context and not in another person's context. So people are becoming, you get a core applications, but you also can choose and make your platter for that matter. And I should be able to help and know what are your main items and probably give a customized SLA. If I'm doing a lot of such webinars, maybe my requirements are very different than if you are not doing. And I was requesting a few days back to Airtel and Geos and others, in a conference that, you did this voice plan and voice to data plan, but now it's time to look into this kind of things, who are doing webinars and other data utilizations that are coming, who are looking at a lot more movies, and probably you can define different kind of packages for them. So with that now, let's just move on. And next slide, please. Now let's get this point very clear. I want to transition very clearly and then AI into 5G, but this is very important slide. What's changing in 5G? right? I gave you the broad picture of 5G, and you have heard from Dr. Corey the evolutions of it. But just to be precise, if I have to sum it up in few points, the first important point is it is one network, and as you can see on the right-hand side that there is a RAN, transport, core, and then there is an orchestration layer. And I'm sure Dr. Dilip after me would talk a bit more about these and virtualization. So I'm not going to get into it, but two important points. If you are aware about 2G, then you probably know, how your terminal, your phone is working to some kind of base stations, and then it goes to some network core and they work. If you know LTE, you probably have heard, the RAN, random, the whole access networks, how that is working. And, from the older BTS, BSC kind of thing and MSC, those terminologies, we have moved into the RAN transport core. And now in 5G, we are bringing orchestration layer. Now, two important things. First of all, this is a service-oriented architecture. Very important to understand 5G is service-oriented architecture. So it's not about just those triangles and hexagon, what I showed it to you. They are one type. Those are just applications and services. Yes, they are there. People talk about it. But underlying, it's all about you have a control plane and you have a data plane, right? When you make a call, there is a signaling that happens. And then the data flows. You send a file to someone, you do certain things. So there is a controlling part. Session gets established, and then you put your data, right? So in 5G, this control plane and the data repositories have been separated. And there is a term called CUPS, control and user plane separation. This is first thing to understand, control and user plane separation. This is very important, and this helps in AI ML algorithms because we play quite a lot with the data, not necessarily in the control side of it. And therefore, the data repositories, you can massage and bring your algorithms and create different applications. The second point, which I said, is service-oriented architecture. What does it mean? It means a lot of network functions I define. It was earlier like a monolithic software. If you go back in 3G and others, and one vendor has delivered and they only can solve your problem, and it becomes very much tied. And if they are not in business, then you have a big, complicated software and you don't know how to serve them well. Therefore, now the software architecture has been changed and we define different functions. Those who are in the software side of you and the computer science, they know, and this is a new field. Earlier, this 5G was a communication department thing, but I think there is core functions that probably they will understand. But writing the software, the architectural development, it's as much as computer science along with the communication engineer. So they're coming together. You want to define an authentication server function. You want to define a user data management function. How do I define a policy control functions? My session management functions, user plane functions. This is how we define lots of network functions, and we write modules and we could call them by the next hierarchical layers. An orchestrator accordingly could even call them depending on the functions. I'll come to that. But first thing is definitions of these network functions. So that's one, service-oriented architecture with control and data plane separation. And the second important thing is this network slicing. Important thing here to know that this is a big beast, right? You have a lot of hardwares that are there in the base station. Mobile is one that we handle, but then at the network side of it, it's a big beast, right? And therefore, you effectively, what you would like to do is somehow keep this hardware layers and the physical assets and one thing, and you can call and nomenclature them with this physical definitions, but you also look into a logical, a virtual definition. So on the top, I don't need to know if I have to write an application and service, do I need to know about all the hardware details? That's too much for me to do. I should be able to write as a service functions. An orchestrator would start calling those devices. There is a map somewhere that tells that virtual to physical mapping, and let them handle at that layer. The upper layers do not need to know. And as we talk about these different applications and services, we define different network slices. Same hardware may be simultaneously used. It's like multiple instances of the same thing. If there is enough computing power, two different functions could be tapping to the same thing. So that's the second most important idea that is there. And then you have all these access, new spectrum that has come. Somebody, I think Dr. Corey talked about below 6 gigahertz and then 26 gigahertz and above. There is spectrum. There is a MIMO that has come, massive input, massive output, or multiple input, multiple output. But in the massive MIMO, we talk about, so it's a 2 by 2, that's the MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. Or 4 by 4, that's being used, those many antennas. But in the future, people have shown with even 64 cross 64 how it could work. And the numerology to aggregate the subcarrier. He was talking about 15 kilohertz, 25 kilohertz, or growing into those bandwidths, 15 kilohertz going to 30, 60, 120, 240 kilohertz. Our NR, new radio, defines the subcarrier spacing from earlier just 50 or 30 to so many kilohertz. So those are some of the other parts that are coming. And deployment-wise, there is an SA and NSA. This is a non-standalone where we have been using the 4G LTE core network, but in standalone, we fully migrate and forget the 4G and then get into the 5G core networks. So these are some of the fundamentals, and you would learn more as Dr. Dilip talks about it. He's a specialist in this area. So let me now, with this backdrop, you have got enough, and in this 30 minutes that I have set on the 5G, the uniqueness of it, the application services, the software orientations, and the key KPIs that are there on latency, machine communications, and the high speed. Let me now delve into some of these AI-related things, what you could do on top of it. What is it still not doing that I have to enter with AI? So next slide, please. So now you can see how can I help through the AI. So basic things, first to get it right. AI itself, if you look into it, it's artificial intelligence, it's a big term. It encompasses many things, and we will not get into all of them, but there are few things called machine learning. There are simple schemes, and then there is a deep learning schemes. So I have been told that many of you have gone through many courses of AI. Therefore, I didn't put any basic AI-related materials. I wanted to cover more of the 5G because these applications, these algorithms would be applied there. Why we need it? Because there is adaptability, scalability, flexibility, real time, and dynamicity. Many of the things in such big network is very, very dynamic, very fluid. Many a times there are many parameters. We don't know how to set them. But we are looking for better service. More customers are going to join. Can I operate with lower cost? My CapEx, one time, but the OpEx, can I reduce? These are some of the questions that keep coming. Whether in the design phase, whether it is subsequent enhancement phase, or whether it is network operations. In all of these dimensions, there are some such fluid questions that keep coming where AI can play a good role. High efficiency, context awareness, and it can also make some future proofing. So as you can see on the left side of 5G, the flexible, scalable support, KPIs, fast adaptability, and optimized operations and efficiently use of resources, particularly the OpEx part of it. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So I gave you here some use cases from ENI, which has been identified. ENI, what is ENI? It's the full form is called Experiential Networked Intelligence. It is a thing called ETSI. There is a body, European Telecom Standards Institute, and they have formed a task force or a study group who have been coming up with such things, because original 5G, you know, the AI was not so much included. And it's good that we don't include that, because please try to understand why AI is sitting a little bit outside. Because, you know, when you build systems, we shouldn't be making it so tight. Standards should not be defining everything and anything, because if you do that, there is no difference between Samsung and company X or Y or Z, right? So everybody wants to innovate. So what we do in standards is optimally define what is a must to define so that they are interoperable across vendors, across functions, across services. That much only you should define in standards, like in ETSI or 3GPP. But then when you say that you have to choose a cell, right? Now, exactly which cell should I be choosing? Could be a little bit my own algorithm. When you choose it, what should happen? What should be the protocol? That is defined by the standard. But can I not choose if I feel better that this cell is not the right one, this is the cell? Then can I not choose? Yes, you can. And that's the kind of flexibility that we see between around standards. So first of all here, ENI, these specific groups, they talk about 4 different things. Let me just take one example so you can read the list. Network operations. Policy-driven IP managed networks. So network-aware statement, and there is a quality of service, because sometimes you send a audio stream, sometimes you send the video streams, and we define how this quality of service will be set. But many a times we set it just fixed way, that if it is a call, maybe I should give priority. If it's video, I can do this or that, or maybe reduce the resolutions. But let's say there is no traffic or there are no other players, and I could take more bandwidth, then do I need to reduce the bandwidth? So it cannot be done only basis of that user. It is a much more aggregative view. And this is where that orchestration starts to come. It knows the context a little bit better, and therefore it could allow. So now the context is known, and if I can write an AI algorithm to define the policy to set the QoS in this particular case, then I can manage better. For example, the next one, infrastructure management. You have many different processing units, right? And I need to manage energy. Now, which one do I keep it on and something? Many times, we put all of them on, but it's not being used. Can I do an energy optimization using some AI algorithm, right? Network assurance. You have a fault identification predictions. Most of the time, we know the whole network operations is pretty big thing. And you have operations control center. If you visit any of these operators, you will see how big is their operations centers. And they are monitoring. Many people are sitting and manual interventions, and they are seeing, oh, this is going down, this is going up, and therefore, I should be switching over and things like that. But human being can only do that much. And if you have to manage not just one region, but for the country, for another country, then this kind of operations would be extremely difficult. And one more thing that comes into mind is that sometimes it has not yet faulty, but inside there are enough patterns that we can see that it is becoming faulty. We have seen that even in our devices, mobile devices, the battery is not yet worn out, but I can give an indications. Or if there is a short circuit possibility, not yet happened, there are enough inside things that are going on that's telling me that, yeah, it's time to move or give an alert or go somewhere and get it checked. Therefore, fault identification and predictions is a very big thing. First of all, you can avoid catastrophic failure. If you have to order your parts, you can do so. Or if you have to manage in a different way, switch over to plan B, you can do that. So I think network assurance of the quality is an AI good applications. And then I also talked about service orchestrations and management, where intelligent network slicing. Now, I talked about the orchestrator, and this looks into network sliced, different, whether it is CPU, GPU that you are using, that whole flow to run a function. If you are running a function, it should be knowing what is the optimal usage of the resources and build a chain in that direction, right? One way to say that, yes, I know these are the things that should be used and therefore allocate bandwidth of a CPU, of a GPU, of this much storage. But the other is, if you know that that applications only requires that much from the past data of that application's running, you can tell exactly how much these resources would be required for memory, for processing power of the CPU, of the DSP, of the GPU. And you can actually allocate even further and increase the capacity. In other words, with the same hardware, OpEx, you could reduce through both of them, network assurance, as well as in terms of the service orchestrations. So these are some broad categories where people have been thinking from ETSI through this study group. And let me just take you maybe from 4 different categories, 4 more examples in next 4 slides to make the point better. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is one example that I'm saying is AI for energy saving, right? So what's happening is, we are putting more and more functions, and that's going to the cloud. So if you read there, you can see server takes 70% of the total power consumption. If you look into the power consumption, the server powers are 70%. And a lot of network functions will now be pushed to the cloud. And so the cloud costs would go up and the power would be there. And deployed and running to meet the requirement of peak hour service. One interesting thing that are happening, that as we cover more and more, the peak power requirements are high. Suddenly, a lot of people come to a place or to an event, whether it is virtual or real, and they use the power and then they don't use it. So the peak power usage goes up compared to the average power. The peak to average ratio, we are seeing high. Now, if you are an operator and if you have to design the system, and if you want to design for the peak power, you have to deploy a lot of servers. And people have interesting ways. Some you install yourself. Some you use somebody else's server, but pay as you go. You don't pay them even if you are not using. But paying is fine if you have the affordability. But the other thing is the energy consumptions. So what we see here, learn and update the service platform. If we update that and we autonomously turn some of the spare servers to the idle state, and predict the peak hours and wake up the necessary number of the servers in the right time. So you see multiple services, these different graphs that are there, colored graphs. The green space nobody has touched. So even though I'm saying 3 services that are running, and even if I take their full utilizations, the green space is left. So I can take those servers to the idle mode and then bring them up whenever this time. What is the bottom line? The x-axis is the time that's going, and the y-axis is the peak load, right? So if at 8 p.m. this is the peak, I just make sure that those servers are up in that time and not in other times. Now you could provision a little bit more, or you could find some algorithm that if there is a requirement, I will wake them up, right? That's very good, but you should be able to do that in a nice way. Now, from this, I think you have got the AI for energy saving. And I'm not talking about specific algorithms. I'll just conclude with that. But before that, let me give some more examples. The next one, please. So this is a beautiful area where you could do it. The next one is AI for cell selections. Now, I gave you the release 15, you know, the way to read. This is intentionally, it is mentioned here, you know, 36.304. If somebody is interested in this kind of topic, let's say to search even, how do we navigate? So my request to the students, you can go to 5G, 3GPP, and then look for those documents. These are marked as TS 36.304. And then you go to that and you see cell reselection procedure. That's an area. Now I picked up from there just to make my point. This is about cell selection where I can use it. But you could do that as an assignment. If somebody is interested and want to see where else can I apply, please go to such documents, read one thing, and then apply yourself and see, oh, can I do something with my AI algorithm? These are not fixed. These are evolving. There is a lot of room to grow there beyond the standards. So let me go to this point. Cell selections, right? 35 parameters are there for system information. What is cell selection? You know the hexagonal cells, right? That's what cellular systems, right? And Dr. Corey explained that nicely, how these cells are there. Now, without AI, you can see periodically I can measure. I can do some threshold setting. These are static configurations. But what I would like to change as is to be is I want to do a triggered measurements, not all the time, because I don't know. It may be an event-driven whole thing. The periodic things is not a interesting things. You know, you don't know the periodicity and it can change. So let's make it event-driven, triggered measurements. I don't want to set a threshold. Today's threshold becomes obsolete. So no threshold or a default threshold could be there, but adjust the thresholds and make it real time and adapt it to changes of the context. For example, speed. You're going slow, you're going fast, things could be different. So cell selection, what is today's job? How the engineers set it. 35 parameters are there for system information. 10 parameters are there for speed dependent selections. The speed, different kinds of speed, which directions are you going, pedestrians to high speed, to train, to car, to under tunnel and things like that. And 13 parameters for interworking. You're not free. You cannot move from one situation to another situation. It is a state diagram that needs to be followed. And the important thing of this interworking, like let's say you are in 5G, but you move to a place which doesn't have 5G. I need to go down to LTE. I came from LTE to Wi-Fi at home. I should be able to switch over. I have a Bluetooth because there is cost associated with all of them, and I might be able to move from one to the other, not handover only, but also these switch over from one technology to another. So look at the parameters, 35 plus 10 plus 13. Now it's a humongous task for anybody to set these thresholds and expect it to work. And that's why we have sometimes call drop and this and that, and even the engineers would not be able to detect what the issues are. And this is the issue. This is where you can set some thresholds, but we can have AI algorithms, and it can be one layer, it can be 3 layers, and this is where the design starts to play. Do I keep one big algorithms with all these inputs as parameters, and then it changes and changes its weight and gives the results? Or do I do a separate for system information, separate for speed, separate for interworking with some as a constraint, and then make an AI algorithms and a network, neural nets that you build? So this is kind of left to us. And this is where each company, each entity can do uniquely and file patents on top of standards, because standards, once you have given, there are patents and you get royalties, but they are called essential IPRs. You have already allowed people to use them, but they will pay to you. But you cannot stop asking somebody not to use, because you have put them in the standards, and therefore you are bound to allow them to use with the royalty for all the compulsory ones. Whereas, you know, these are your proprietary algorithms, and you can excel vis-a-vis one, and somebody says, oh, this network doesn't have call drop, does very well, can optimize it, and that's the benefit we have. And in this, again, the interesting thing, I am not going into details, beam switching. So it is becoming very, very important in 5G that you are pinpointed having beams, and then you will also switch beams, not just your speeds and this and that, what I talked about, but the beam directions, beam sharpness are also getting altered. So this is a big space in which AI is contemplated to be used, being used separately for beam searching, separately for speed, but also combining them to take it to a bigger point. Now a little bit accelerate, we have less time. So next one, please. I think you have got a hang of the 2 AI examples. The next one is for AI for front haul management. Now, again, here, please try to understand that front haul, back hauls, you understand that there is connections. Now you have physical layers. Those who know the ISO-OSI layers, right? There are 7 layers. There is physical layer, there is a data link layer, which is MAC here, and things like that. So we try to map those 7 ISO-OSI layers to these 4G, 5G standards. Additionally, what you see here, I don't know if you can read that, but after RF, the PHY layer itself is so complex that we have split in 5G low PHY and a high PHY, and then low MAC and a high MAC. This MAC is a medium access control, and it does a lot of scheduling. It is a high potential area again for AI applications. Any scheduling is a great thing. You can apply AI. But you can see here, these are the layers that are there. Now, between that low PHY and the high PHY, there is a new definition that we have done in standards. It's called open front haul. And what's happening is people are thinking, earlier they were allowing that big monolithic devices or equipments. Now they said, okay, split. I can take this from one vendor, this from another vendor. Now it's even going further granular, and I'm saying Open RAN. There is a new standard called ORAN, and you should look into that. ORAN standards are coming. Operator-defined next-gen RAN architecture and interface. The idea is to make it open, intelligent with a lot of AI applications, virtualized, as well as fully interoperable LAN. This is the standard that's evolving, and you can apply AI here in these cross layers, because you have this physical to low PHY to high PHY to this, and you can define certain algorithm that helps you to take some of the parameters from one layer and still build certain solutions into the other layers. So you can look into much more details in the ORAN standard, you will understand. The fourth applications I wanted to give is on the elastic resource management in the next slide. So I talked about layers, services, cell selections, energy saving, cost saving, all these examples. This is one more on resource management. How do you make my resource management elastic? And we talked about orchestrator. Orchestrator has first functions to define right, devices, right resources to be able to deploy for that application and service. But if I put AI, then I can make it even more optimal for those virtual network functions. Now, how do you do that? You can, look into the computational aspects. Because each of these applications, as I said earlier, I could understand that these applications are more memory intensive. These are more processor intensive, right? And these are maybe bandwidth intensive. So there are different classes. And if you have understanding of your physical resources and these applications and services, these AI layer can bridge the gap between the two to map it well so that, the right level of resources would be deployed. So the elasticity is brought in this resource management, whether it is CPU, GPU, lot of NPUs are coming more on the devices side, not yet on the network side of it, but graphical processing units, because applications like what I showed, games, and if you have an autonomous car, these interactive processing things, low latency systems, 5G is bringing its own dimensions, but the processing power that is required would be large vis-a-vis some of the smaller calls and other applications. So you need to allow from narrowband IoT, because even in 4G, we have allowed that. From that, because some of these applications could be very narrowband. Like, for example, in a smart city or smart building, you can have BESCOM or your local electric supplier, and they don't need to go home. They can monitor the meter, Bluetooth meter, by some technology, Bluetooth or otherwise. You can measure it and you can pass it on. But these data is required, once a month, one time, very minuscule data. So these are on one hand applications, but on the other hand, you also have very high end. But is this any less important? No, for that day, for that data, even if it goes wrong or it gets delayed, it has serious implications of cash flow of the company or to the users. So how do you take care of these various application services, which is a wide dynamic range through this mechanism, is the important thing. Now I'm coming closer to my presentations. If you go to the next slide. So to sum it up, putting together, you have AI in various ways, and whether it is in the device front, initial access, in the power management, in the frontal management, or in the core network and cloud NFV, all of these places, slice management, you could use that into a nice way, and you could define on top of the standards. Next slide. Not just in this layer, but there is more to it. Going back to my earlier point, the RAN, transport, and core, this together is end-to-end slices we can build through the service orchestrator. Orchestrator is a general term. You can use it for functions, for applications, for services, for slices, but we make slice-aware orchestrator, but we don't make separate orchestrators. We want to fuse them. But in this case, as you can see, that there is, even in service orchestrator, there could be an AI element. This is not there fully. And that helps the last mile of customer and the vertical. The service deployment that happens. Has this customer got certain things? Is there a problem with it? The last part of the service optimizations, the prioritizations, assurance that we have given by such and such date, some things will happen. You are able to monitor through a thin layer of AI, not a sophisticated one, thin layer, but powerful one to understand the customer's requirements in that vertical. So next slide, please. So the problem domains, now those who are specialists, let me explain that AI can be very simple AI for self-contained problems, right? It could be very immediate benefit. Some local contents you can use it. Or you can have some trickier AI for linked problems. I gave a lot of examples in the energy and others. Network context you could set. Compatibility and enhancement for E2E network. But then there are new problems and systems with advanced AI, right? Some kind of disruptive innovations for longer term and significant change of the system with advanced AI. This is currently not being thought about. This is where DL, the deep learning, can be used, but we are not thinking too much about DL in communication because it's the first layer and DL is quite complex. You need huge amount of data and we may not have to start with. So for deployment, we are not putting deep learning based algorithms, but internally you can define, because as you start launching simple ML algorithms, people start to get the benefits, but you also collect these data so that if you define a DL, you don't invoke them, but you can start operating and learning from it. So experimentations are going to happen on the DL, deep learning, but the deployment will happen more for machine learning based systems. And that is captured in my next slide, which is, do you know ML? That's very dominant. If you go to the next slide. And you have all other kinds of things within machine learning. There is the supervised and unsupervised. So you look into supervised training, which has got some data and you have been able to train. We have to do that. And from our old network, LTE and others, we could take some set of data which is still meaningful, and we could start making these algorithms ready. And then hopefully, once the 5G is launched, you can learn a bit more specific ones from 5G and make it better, and then subsequently go into the deep learning. There is unsupervised learning, people are trying, and reinforcement learning, which means suppose you have said something to people. How do you know right or wrong? You know, people give thumbs up or thumbs down and you come to know you said right. And therefore you gain confidence in your own algorithm. That's how the reinforcement learning starts to happen. So supervised learning, modified reinforcement learning, these two are becoming popular. Unsupervised, yes, we'll have to develop, and deep learning in the experimentation phase. What are these algorithms in simple ML? You can have linear regression, you have support vector machines, and I'm not going into details today for time, and I've been told that you are going through such courses. K nearest neighbor, your random forest, simple thing, decision trees, naive Bayes algorithm, and if you are not sure, there are many courses in Coursera, Simply Learn and others, please go through them. Simple ML algorithms, learn some of the standards from 5G and try to see if you could apply it somewhere to make something interesting for you. With that, I am coming to the last two slides to conclude. They don't convey much, but what it should be and what it actually is basically the ML algorithm. You have to do a lot of trainings. And this is where I have told, and we have been working with many from Samsung, with many universities. We have at least 1,000 students working with us in computer vision algorithms, in IoT algorithms, in voice algorithms, and even in 5G it is possible, whereby, you know, people get engaged, they create certain data, they use it because that's helpful for us. It's a give and take. And at the same time, you learn these new algorithms, and some workshops we do with the students to take it forward. So that way, it's a mutually learning as well as, enriching in terms of the data and use cases and experimentations. So that's happening quite nicely. We are working with 1,000 people in a program by name Prism. And anybody interested, we could connect to the right divisions for that. And let me just conclude with the last slides. It's more about put an ML in the network, results and enhancement that we see, then we should be able to build on that. Is it an isolated AI? And as I said, standards are there already, so we should keep that standards and piggyback on that in the boundary, in the interfaces with simple AI algorithm where there is a lot of ad hoc decisions, where there is a lot of parameters, where there is a room for predictions. These are the places where you can enrich the overall 5G systems with AI, a scalable and deployable AI solutions. And as time progresses, we'll go to deep learning, we'll understand explainable AI and things like that. But for today, I think this is good enough. I hope you have picked up some of the basics of 5G and how AI could be applied in 5G. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Uday.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for the nice talk. So, one or two questions, please, from the audience.
Yeah, I can see that people are saying the session has been informative. If you have enjoyed, if you have learned, I'm happy. If you have further questions, you can send in LinkedIn, or you can ask me now also anything more.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Now I request Dr. Omji to introduce the next speaker, Dilip Krishnaswamy. Omji, please introduce the next speaker. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Aloknath De, for sharing your valuable knowledge over the topic artificial intelligence for 5G. It was a nice presentation which provides a depth of understanding towards utilization of 5G connectivity using artificial intelligence for smart city development. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is a renowned personality across the globe in the field of communication systems. Our next speaker for the topic 5G virtualized infrastructure and application has a very rich experience in the areas of 5G network, distributed information processing, and blockchain technology. He initiated his career as a platform architect in Intel, being a senior research scientist in IBM Research Labs. He had achieved several accolades while working in exceptional projects. He received his PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Currently, he is working as Vice President, New Technologies, Research and Development, Reliance Industries Limited, India. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Dilip Krishnaswamy for sharing his valuable knowledge and expertise with us. Please welcome Dr. Dilip Krishnaswamy.
Dilip, sir.
Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Once you share the screen.
Okay.
Once you share the screen, then please go for that more. There you just do that disable participate annotation. Vasu? Vasu?
Yes.
You made sir as a co-host now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, that's right, sir.
So please click on that share screen. Yeah. Yes.
You see me?
Yes. Now please go there to more. Just click that some red button will come, or else I'll request for the remote control. Please give that permission. I will do that. Please give permission.
That's okay. I can move.
No. Here the problem is they are doing this annotation, so you have to disable that annotation. There's some more will be there. More. Click on the more and come down the third one.
So do I have to approve these people?
No, don't approve anything. Just you do the disable annotation.
Where?
There should be more should be there. Once you share the screen.
Yeah.
So once you share the screen, there should be, you click on that more option. Can you see the more option above? Or else please give permission, sir. I am requesting for the remote control. Wait. You just please give permission. I'll do that. A requested permission, you just give yes. Uday Shankar ne.
Disable what?
Yeah, disable annotation.
Yeah.
You did not? Okay, sir. Now you can go ahead.
Hey, sorry. I think somebody had control of my screen.
No.
No, I had given an accept to somebody.
Maybe you might have given to me or not, I don't know. So do one thing, sir.
No. Somebody was trying to move the screen. So who can share?
Or else you send me your slides. I'll do it.
No. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay.
Now, yes.
So you're not able to find out who this miscreant is, who's doing this nonsense?
I don't know that we'll find out, sir, again later.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely shocking behavior. Whoever is doing this,
Yes.
Totally unacceptable.
Yes, sir.
And whoever this person is now, we've been seeing this from the start of this session.
Yes.
Should be completely ashamed of themselves. I mean, this is not right. Anyway, I don't know what they're gaining by disrupting.
Yeah, now it's fine, sir. You please go ahead,
fine,
sir.
but you know, the first talk, Professor was talking. So anyway, I just want to give you guys an overview of this, where infrastructure is headed and what kind of applications can be developed in the future, and set a stage for different possible areas for exploration as well. And we'll build on what Dr. Alok just talked about. So things that he has already covered, I'll try to skip. But, so one thing that's happening is that our emerging infrastructure is going to be completely virtualized, especially with 5G coming and all that. And as much as possible, a lot of stuff will run in software inside machines. Now you may ask, weren't things running in software before? Yes, they were, but it was sort of very custom software closed interfaces and all those things that were happening. So a lot of work is going on trying to allow everybody to kind of participate in the overall emerging infrastructure. And it's not just about the network, it's about all the applications and services that have to be enabled. And there may be different, participants in this ecosystem who want to maybe just provide a new service for people, right? But they want to tag along to an existing infrastructure and provide that service. The infrastructure provider may want to choose different vendors and who can interoperate with each other to deploy the infrastructure. So a lot of work is going on that front. The other aspect is that these protocols, standards like 4G, 5G, they go through different releases, say release 13, 14, 15, 16, and so on. And each time, if you install the software for that particular version of the standard, and if you put it on a certified box, then you carry it and deploy it at that location and things like that. And you take away the old box. So a movement has happened in terms of, hey, let's think in terms of cloudifying the whole thing, but it's not a cloud as in a cloud somewhere else, like in Amazon cloud or Microsoft Azure cloud, but it is a little cloud at the edge or a little cloud within the network where you can run virtual machines and containers and things like that. And in the past, a lot of work went around virtualization with virtual machines. And then as Dr. Alok was talking about these virtual network functions and so on to deploy the different components of the infrastructure. These virtual network functions were implemented in virtual machines. But there's a problem with running these things in virtual machines, which is that every virtual machine VM deployment needs its own operating system, and it takes up a lot more memory space and things like that. So now the tendency is to move towards containerization. So you might have heard of Kubernetes and things like that, and Docker containers. So these functions are now executing inside containers, which which minimally utilize only the functions that they need, and they run and they share the operating system. So you could just compile the application with a minimal set of libraries that you need, and then let it run on a shared operating system with the partitioning and isolation provided by the operating system itself. And so that trend has caught on, and now that minimizes the amount of resources that are utilized in creating these functions. So that's what's going on. And essentially you have Intel or AMD processors put together in some little data center, and then you have virtual machines and containers running there. You can have containers running inside virtual machines, like a typical Intel's high-end system may support maybe 3 virtual machines, but it may be instead you could run 200 containers if you like, on the same machine. And depends on the computation that they're doing and so on. But and containers could be running inside virtual machines as well. So you could have 3 virtual machines, and you could have some containers running inside each of the virtual machines. So this kind of infrastructure is getting deployed and all over the world, and in India as well, and particularly for 5G in India. So, and it's very hierarchical. You will need some network nodes at the edge, which are serving, there'll be E node Bs, G node Bs, and things like that. E node B is the 4G base station, G node B is the 5G base station. So those will be there. And if you want some low latency applications to execute locally at the edge, or some application that's functioning based on the local data that is there and quickly processing. For example, an augmented reality application could be executed at the edge. So those things will be running at these lower nodes in the infrastructure. Then there could be some in-network data centers, another maybe a Azure or Amazon cloud data center way up there. So some functions could be deployed at the edge, some further in networks. So this kind of processing is going on, and it's not just the infrastructure itself for the protocols, but also applications and services. Now that this kind of architecture is. So I will walk you through a few applications and talk about different techniques to manage this infrastructure and some of the work that's going on there. I'll talk about new areas like blockchain, AI, and quantum, things like that. Since AI is Dr. Alok has already covered, so I'll very minimally just talk about that. But I'll talk about the other aspects a little more. So, so this is what's happening. This is this trend towards disaggregation that I was talking about. And this area is called microservices. And, it's like, if you wrote some C program, initially you would have written, your first C program would have been a very monolithic C program where everything was done by one program. And then maybe you learned about subroutines and you said, okay, let me break it down and write some subroutine. Maybe I'll reuse the subroutine again and again. So I'll make it a little more modular. And the same thing has kind of extended all the way to system design, where previously some custom software would have been developed. It would have been one monolithic system with, which met all the requirements of the system. But then there would be certain, you would realize as you build the system that there would be certain components that you could reuse again and again. So why not create what are called microservices that could be reused across different applications that may be developed. So so think of those subroutines as now being implemented as microservices, and then these microservices then combine in a service chain kind of thing to execute a sequence of tasks to accomplish a larger task. But it's possible that you have 4 different AI or ML algorithms to actually solve that resource allocation problem that Dr. Alok was talking about. You could decide today you want to use this algorithm and see how it does. Tomorrow you want to use a different algorithm. So you just change the service chain such that you just point to the different algorithm and execute that today, and then deploy a different service chain tomorrow. And so you have a lot of flexibility. You can keep the rest of the system, like where the data is coming in for your processing, that remains the same. What functions actually receiving the output of the processing would remain the same. All you did was change the ML algorithm potentially. So, it gives a lot of flexibility in kind of putting systems together and so on. So this whole thing is happening. The entire 5G ecosystem, the infrastructure itself is getting virtualized, and all the different functions are getting implemented with different microservices. Now it's possible that some microservice may be needed more than another microservice. For example, if there's a microservice that deals with mobility, for example, there's a function called AMF, Access and Mobility Function in 5G. Now, if a lot of people are mobile during the day, unfortunately during COVID times, we probably don't need it. if they were traveling to work and coming back, you would need more instances of that function getting deployed during the day. And then at night when everybody goes home, they're not that much mobility, and those, so you would deploy less number of instances, but still support the function. But let's say you needed 50 instances of the function, maybe at night you only need 3 instances of the function after midnight. So that way you can dynamically scale the utilization of the system. See, what if now this whole thing was a monolithic implementation? Your entire 5G core was one monolithic implementation. If you wanted to scale just this particular function, then that entire implementation of all the functions would have to be replicated many times, instantiated many times. So that's where this microservices-based design helps in like the scalable replication dynamically. And it also helps in ease of development and deployment, because there's so many things, there's so many capabilities that we're developing. And typically nowadays, it's not just about just, hey, I need to turn on and make my 5G infrastructure work, but I need to create all kinds of applications to serve people, you know, whether it's delivering, you know, TV or, you know, some interesting application for game or something like that there to play on the web. So all of these things are, can be independently developed, tested, and deployed. So, so you can give an engineer the responsibility to take care of a particular microservice, and the engineers to just focus on its input and output, and not worry about the rest of the stuff. And there's also a concept called stateless microservices. So the state can be managed outside the system, and all you do is you take your input, and the state can be did as part of the input. So you just process, and then you decide what your output is. So stateless design is also happening in this space. So yeah, typically you would use Docker containers and Kubernetes and things like that. Implement. And a lot of challenges here, how much to disaggregate, you know. You want to create microservices, but would you create a microservice just to compute the square root of a number? Probably not, and definitely not. I mean, because, you know, every time you talk to a microservice, you actually submit an HTTPS request to that microservice, and it comes back with its results. The latency is involved in accessing the microservice and, you know, executing it. So, so you have to have a certain level of granularity that, you know, in that function, so that it does something unique, and yet, you know, it doesn't affect the performance of the system. So you shouldn't make it too fine-grained. So it becomes a bit of an art at some point to kind of decide, okay, where do you cut off and say, okay, this is a microservice. Or where if you've decided these are two microservices, but you know, most of the time you find that you're executing them together, and each one of them is very fine-grained. So maybe you don't want to incur the latency of communicating between those microservices. So then you merge them. So you could initially try to fragment as much as possible, disaggregate as much as possible. But then you start merging and say, okay, this is the system design that I should have that gives a good performance. Then another thing about these microservices is that you have what's called an API gateway. An API gateway is how you access the microservice. But behind that, there's another thing called a load balancer. So like I mentioned, you have these microservices executing in a stateless manner, and there could be multiple instances of them. So you could just have a load balancer, and you know, as tasks come in for that microservice, you know, you go round robin and you give it to this instance of the microservice, and then go to that instance of the microservice and so on. So let's say there are 200 users that are moving across town at this point, and you have 5 instances for mobility management. So then what you would do is you give 20 users to one microservice, 20 users to another one, 20 users to another one. So you distribute the load. So you'll have all those 5 instances processing 20 users at a time. So, and so the load balancer is there to distribute the load. And if one of the instances is already highly loaded, then you will intelligently kind of allocate the load to another microservice instance. Those kinds of things. All of the typical cloud-related management go down into this level of management as well. And then you have to, as I was mentioning, create like a service chain? How do you dynamically combine these microservices to accomplish an end-to-end task? And you may have to do it dynamically, like I mentioned. Maybe you pick a different AI to actually create something, or let's say the video system, the network load is increased quite a bit, and so you need to kind of translate the video, and so you insert another function that actually reduces the video rate that's being delivered to the user, so that more users get access to the video. Each one of them is getting it at a lower rate. So, but you might insert this capability into the service chain. And a lot of multiple processors are available, and you're executing all of these concurrently. So how do you efficiently utilize the resources? So this is generally what's happening in this space. So just wanted to give you a flavor that a lot of stuff is happening in software. And depending on where you're operating, if you're at the physical layer, you're fine. You still will be doing physical layer design and things like that. But quickly, by the time you get to the IP layer and stuff, and you have data packets, you're pretty much doing all your work in software. And intelligent software as well, like as Dr. Luke was talking about. So then the other thing that happens now is all of these functions, like I said, we have edge data centers, in-network data centers, cloud data centers, and then you have to place all of these functions. Maybe the edge and network data centers have limited resources, so you place only some of the functions there, and the rest you would host in a remote data center and so on. So these are some of the research challenges about how do you partition, collapse, replicate functions across these data centers. How do you address latency constraints, user mobility, dynamic resource mobility, and security? And with regard to these resources, and the resources are about compute, network, storage, and energy as well, as Dr. Lucas mentioned. And there's a lot of interesting things going on because you have to stitch all of these functions together to do cool stuff, and so you have to continuously monitor what's going on, and then you have to adapt. And as you monitor, you do the analytics, and then for the adaptation, you do the optimization, and then you do the orchestration, which says, okay, which functions are going to execute where, and then, if you dynamically need to increase the availability of a particular microservice instance, scaling it up or down. So all of these things are happening. So the right side is all where all the network functions are getting deployed. On the left side is a control plane. It's called, I would say, is distributed SDN, because it's trying to control all of these functions as to which is going to execute where, how much resources do they get, and so on. And as part of that, and we talk about network slicing, the distributed SDN, the control plane actually stitches the slices together to create an end-to-end path in the data plane on the right side. So this change that. So you would want to think about, as I was talking about this distributed processing across data centers. These small data centers may have limited capacity and so on. So you would think about maybe those applications that have lower latency to actually be deployed there in the small data center. And then there may be a primary data center. Both of them, all these three small data centers, primary data centers, they all have the same energy cost for processing. Are you seeing this on the slide? So all of these things may have the same energy cost because they're in Bangalore, and the energy may be more expensive. Let's say maybe in Mysore the energy is a little lower, and you have the Kaveri River, and maybe you can have a data center that's executing at lower energy cost, and also probably solar and wind power as well. So theoretically, its energy may be lower to execute stuff, but then there's a higher latency because you're serving users in some smaller pocket of areas in Bangalore and all the way from Mysore. So the latency is higher, energy cost could be lower, but it could have very high capacity. This can have some medium capacity, higher relative to the small data centers, but still the same high energy cost as a small data center. But it'll have some medium latency and so on. So, and this will have the lowest latency, but a high energy cost, but very low capacity. So depending on all these constraints, you will be trying to place all of these functions in these different locations dynamically. And there are different areas in 5G that you have to worry about. You've heard about all of them, EMBB, OLL, CMMTC. And then I think I saw something in the chat window about, oh, is 5G going to affect us from a health perspective or something? I saw first talk. So there are two frequency spectrum. Right now we're working on sub-6 gigahertz. And then there's millimeter wave as well, which is tens of gigahertz. Both of these frequencies do not have the energy to displace like an electron from an atom, right? So they don't, very unlikely that they have, they're going to impact people, but still disclaimer is always there that we don't know until we deploy. But the frequencies are still low. That maybe there is some power that's getting absorbed. So maybe if you use it excessively, it may be a problem. So that's where these headsets may all be useful. But sub-6 gigahertz is where we're already operating with Wi-Fi stuff like that. But millimeter wave is where you have tens of gigahertz, so the bandwidth is much higher, and so you get higher performance. As mentioning, all the networks are getting virtualized, and we also have to think about edge computing and mobile and multi-access, and then you have network slicing. There's distributed analytics and optimization, and overall you're thinking about it as a smart network in operations. Dr. Alok was talking about. And this is a system architecture with all the different 5G functions, and you can each one of them is getting virtualized and implemented independently, and they'll all be utilized together to deploy the overall solution. This is the user plane, the user equipment. The UE is like a phone that talks to radio access network. This is a user plane function. This is the data network. These are all the stuff in the control plane, all these functions. This is like for mobility management and things like that. So the session management function and so on. So there are different functions that are in the control plane. And all of these things work with each other, and they can all be independently scaled as needed. And this is a slide I want you to think about. If you're more of an applications person who wants to kind of provide some new services, and maybe there are all these this funding for individual smart cities in India where you can go to create your own applications. So think about your creating your own edge application, whether it's to deliver milk or newspapers or coconuts to people and so on. Whatever application you want to think about, you could try to create one and help people in your community, by creating an edge service around it. It could be for healthcare, it could be a local banking service. You could enable some community WhatsApp or Twitter kind of application and so on. As data gets processed, you will also see that blockchain-based transactions will also be prevalent. So on. For farmers, you could provide some weather information. For people, for traffic, for pandemics now, we can have emergency services, to deliver medicines or vaccines, or to find the nearest center where there are ventilators to treat people and so on. So, so a lot of potential to kind of impact communities creating these applications. I mean, assume that this infrastructure is there. and what can you do with it? That would be the more fun part, I think, going forward. But if you want to be part of the infrastructure also, then that is fun too. You can do some machine learning and smart networking, things like that, to make the infrastructure work. So you have a choice to be in the network or to be just outside the network with something fun with it. So some of the fun things that are happening in the network are like self-organizing networks, network slicing, as Dr. Alip was talking about, distributed mobility management, analytics, distributed optimization. And with slicing, the goal is to create different slices for different applications, such that the end-to-end slice may have to meet different kinds of quality of service requirements. And but somehow the infrastructure will guarantee across the slices that it will deliver the performance for each slice separately. And now then, you want to think about all the different parameters that you want to worry about. What is the latency? What's the bandwidth? How much memory, compute energy? What redundancy and service availability are you going to provide for this particular network slice and things like that? What are the different types of flows? Within the infrastructure, you can have delay tolerant or delay sensitive flows, or ultra delay sensitive flows with URLLC, or low bandwidth flows or high bandwidth flows, real time flows, and so on, or quasi real time flows. That kind of partitioning is more. It's still within the infrastructure. It's not aware of the context in which the data is flowing. So the context itself may tell you what these constraints are. For example, if it's email, it can be delay tolerant. But if it is some critical message that needs to reach a healthcare provider, then that is highly delay sensitive flow that you worry about. So these different contexts will define all these different their parameters, and so then a specific slice will be created for each of these flows, and then mapped to a slice that meets those requirements. For example, if there's a slice that says I'll an end-to-end delay of 50 milliseconds, and this flow says I can tolerate up to 60 milliseconds, then you can put that flow that says, hey, I'm fine with a delay of up to 60 milliseconds in a slice that's saying I will definitely do it in 50 milliseconds. Right? So you map the flow to an appropriate slice. And so as the flows come up in your system and you have different slices, you map them to the available slices. And dynamically, you also could increase the number of slices that are there, which means that you're allocating more resources for that particular type of flows. So you have to think about an end-to-end network orchestrator in this regard, and the multiple domains that come into the picture. Within each domain, you have to do resource allocation. So you have RAM, you have transport, you have the core network, and you may have another transport from the core network to some cloud data center. So now you have RAM, you have a transport domain, you have a cloud, core network domain, you have another transport domain, and then you may have a cloud domain. So you have like 5 domains to kind of stitch together for an end-to-end service. And so you have an end-to-end orchestrator that would combine all of these domains together and manage all the resources across these domains. And so within each of the domains, you have what's called a network service slice instance, and these slice instances are stitched together to create an end-to-end slice. And so you can be controlling each of these slice instances independently as needed as well. So, and you can have scalable, flexible, and on-demand resource allocation slices. And the virtual, the network functions can be both physical and virtual that you will stitch together, especially things that are happening at a physical layer, all physical network functions. And then you can combine RAN and core network slices. You can have one-to-one mapping between a RAN and core network slice, or one-to-many, one RAN to many core network slices, so the packets can take different paths, or multiple RANs can connect to a single core network slice. So they would share, different RANs would share the same core network, and things like that. So, and these slice paths can be stitched dynamically also as needed. You can allocate these slices for multiple flows and have admission control for these flows depending upon what users have subscribed for. Then maybe they will be able to get access to higher priority flows depending upon what they paid for. So differentiated services could be possible in this kind of system. And so overall now the NFV, network functions virtualization kind of system has expanded to kind of actually enable slice management. So you have to think about the communication service that needs to be deployed, and then what are the network slices that are available, and then the slice subnets that are used to realize that slice. And all of that still has to be managed within this virtualized infrastructure. So back to this hierarchical processing, I want to give you a few examples of what's happening. So, one of the areas is self-organizing networks. And when you have like a physical cell ID, for example, you can have values from 0 to 503 for LTE, and for 5G, it's 0 to 1007. What this is it's an ID for every cell. You want to have you represent it with a lesser number of bits. The cell ID itself may be, the actual cell ID may be a very long descriptor. And so instead of that, you could potentially call it a virtual cell ID, which is locally managed. And so you may have thousands of cells across a new network, but there may be a cell with cell ID 15 in Mysore and another one in Hyderabad, also with the same cell ID, which is fine as long as the cell in Mysore is not talking to the cell in Hyderabad. So what you worry about is the numbers that are allocated to these cells, and then which are the neighboring cells. So there's something called PCI collision, which is the cell has a neighbor with the same PCI value. So the cell 3 has a neighbor which has the same PCI value too. That's called a collision. But PCI confusion can be that the cell is fine, but it has two neighbors which have PCI, same PCI. For example, with cell C9, it has two neighbors, C4 and C12, but they both have the same PCI of 1. And so when you're trying to do mobility management and cells, a user is connected to cell C9 and it's saying, hey, cell with PCI 1, take over this particular user, but the actual user is actually moving towards cell C4, right? And there's a confusion, right? So that's why it's called a PCI confusion. So you want to avoid that confusion. You also want to avoid collision because they can't even talk to each other if they have the same number. So essentially, this becomes a map coloring problem, so that neighboring cells have different colors and things like that, so that you avoid this. So this problem can be translated to a graph coloring problem, but typically this whole problem is executed centrally. So maybe at midnight, if you created some new cells and things like that, you installed something at midnight, you run this whole thing and give some new cell IDs to all the new cells. But going forward, we may have all kinds of dynamic access points and things like that coming up and going out in the network, the devices themselves becoming access points. So, the whole network could be very dynamic. And in that regard, you still have to give a PCI number for all of these things. So centralized way of doing it, for all of India or something may not be very feasible. So you want to do it in a distributed manner. So you want to make sure that if some new cell comes up, you quickly give it some ID, but make sure that the local graph doesn't have any conflicts. So you do a local map coloring problem and see if everything works out. But in the process, if something changes at the edge, then you still have to worry about, if 13 is changing its color to blue to, accommodate a new cell that came in, then is 13 part of some other neighboring network, and is its PCI affected based on that? So then you have to go to the next level of hierarchy, which is where, if you are doing some processing in N3C, now you have to do it across N2B, which is trying to kind of reconcile any PCI confusion collision across two little subnetworks. So, but doing it hierarchically is a good thing. So you're not having to solve the entire problem for all of India just because you add it. So, you can see that this kind of self-optimization networking kind of problems, which were being solved in a centralized way, can will be increasingly distributed and hierarchically distributed as well. And so you can have these hybrid variants, which is centralized or hierarchical hybrid variants that you can do optimization. But you can generalize this for any kind of problem, including, for example, mobility. So if users are moving, you want to assign a particular user to a particular cell and things like that. And as Dr. Alok was talking about, all those parameters, the whole bunch of them that you have to utilize to kind of figure out and handle the mobility. If you do it, if you can partition the work such that, if you're solving for an entire network, then all of those things may be, the number of users that you're dealing with may be very large. And so if you break it down and say, solve the problem for each subgraph of users for connecting to, let's say this is a distributed unit in a 5G infrastructure, this is another distributed. So for each DU, you could solve the problem separately as opposed to solving it at a central unit. But just like we were trying to avoid the collision confusion for PCI allocation, similarly here, all you'll have to worry about is the users at the edge between two subgraphs, and that you can probably solve with a CU, a central unit. Not sure if that terminology was covered, but essentially in the emerging RAN, you have a central unit which could execute most of the software stack in the upper layers software stack, like PDCP and above and things like that. Lower layer MAC-PHY will all execute typically in the DU. And the DU may actually talk to a remote unit, which could be like a remote radio. So remember these terms: central unit, distributed unit, remote unit, CU, DU, RU. If you write some research papers, start talking about those things, because that's the emerging infrastructure. It's split in that manner. So when we try to study this mobility problem, and Professor Maitri Vattakuru is now working on implementing the 5G core functions in the 5G testbed for India. And our team is moving along well in that regard. So when we're thinking about this mobility aspect, it was good to kind of do it in a distributed manner, as opposed to in a centralized manner, which would be a higher dimensional problem. If you break it down, you're solving lower dimensional problems for each of the subgraphs, and then maybe just resolving some problems at the interaction. So again, start thinking this hierarchical manner, hierarchical and distributed manner, to kind of solve all the problems to a large extent. And this goes away from, to a large extent, a lot of things were being centralized. So, and when you talk about decentralization, blockchain systems also being considered in the space. And the blockchain systems are broader than cryptocurrency, and actually in our scheme of things, we're not actually thinking about cryptocurrency at all. We actually, and we're thinking more about what is the data that's being processed, who are the people who need to have information about it. And for example, if you're trying to build an end-to-end network, but the different parts of the network slice belong to different vendors, then as you put a slice together, you want to record that across in a blockchain system across those participating entities for that network slice. So, what happens in the blockchain system is that there is a ledger that's getting created. A ledger is not like an accounting thing. It's just a database of, it's like a log of things that are happening. So, but the log is shared across all of these entities. Okay, but it's not just about the data that was produced. It is also about the logic that produced the data. So if there was some logic that executed that decided, which user was being served by which network function and things like that, or what kind of service was being provided, then all the entities get to know of it. But the logic is actually also shared across all. So they have these typical systems. You have private programs updating private ledgers. In blockchain systems, you have shared programs updating shared ledgers. And when you record in the log, you not only record the result of what happened, but you also record which version of the program. Let's say you decided to do the resource allocation today with some machine learning, cool machine learning algorithm that you come up with. Then you record that version of the machine learning algorithm in your database. Right? And by sharing this information, you provide trust across all the stakeholders, immutability, consensus. Provenance is about having a history, smart contracts and programs that execute. The immutability comes around because of what's called a hash chain. So data goes into a block. The hash of that block becomes the content of the next block, and the hash of this block becomes a part of the content of this block, and so on. And so if you change anything in a particular block, it changes or affects all the other blocks because this block's hash is affected. So if somebody comes to audit the system, they find that if the data was changed here, the hash is changed, hash is different, and then, but this guy is having a different hash. So then, okay, so there's a problem. So they'll find out that there's a problem. So you cannot unilaterally change something once you've created this hash chain. So this is the typical data structure that's created in the ledger. And then inside that ledger, you also store what version of the programming also executed to provide information. And it goes beyond cryptocurrency. It's about any kind of transaction that you executed. And then in smart cities, you can have all of these entities executing algorithms, smart algorithms, and then you can record what version of the algorithm you used. So, we mentioned that, there'll be blockchains provide benefits for sharing, transparency, traceability. Also, you can make sure that you're maintaining privacy, they're only exposing information that's needed, but it's applicable to different verticals. It's not about cryptocurrency or money or digital money. And it's applicable to beyond banking and finance and healthcare, energy management, real estate, telecom, supply chain, food, agriculture, automotive. Like for pandemics, if you want to think about a supply chain, you want to dynamically reroute ventilators from one hospital to another, depending upon the demand for patients that are coming in from one area to another. And maybe one city had the surge for the pandemic now, and later on, so Maharashtra is seeing a lot more, and Tamil Nadu is seeing a lot more, and Karnataka is a little less. But maybe as Maharashtra, progresses further and the numbers come down, Karnataka may actually go up. So then you want to reroute some of the equipment to Karnataka as well. So you might want to manage the supply demand on that supply chain dynamically and reroute and things like that. So you'd not only be recording information, you would actually be executing intelligent algorithms for optimization in a blockchain across hospitals, across states, and things like that for pandemics. So those kinds of things can be done. And then you can have hierarchical distributed blockchain networks. And like you said, you could have a blockchain network you can have a blockchain network purely for Maharashtra and purely for Karnataka, and then combine that across the two states and so on, and then combine that for all over India. what we have done is we have created, as I was talking about virtual functions, we've created what are called virtual chains based functions. So any data that we want to record on the blockchain, we execute a virtual function that will actually create the ledger for that. And you can actually do it in across distributed data centers. We can execute these functions locally and also lazily synchronize as well to remote ledgers. This is actually nominated just 2 days ago in the Leading Lights Award for most innovative blockchain for telecom strategy across the world, and also in the Blockchain Revolution Global Enterprise Blockchain Awards for Technology and Platforms. So right now it's a finalist for both of them internationally. So what we're doing in India is, as we said, we have created virtualized infrastructure so we can have these virtual DLT network or blockchain network. DLT is distributed ledger technology, which is a broader term than blockchain. And then you can have VDLT network nodes, virtual DLT network nodes, which is each one which corresponds to each of the nodes that are in the blockchain. And then you can create a network of them, which is a VDLT chain, VDLTN. And then you can have the ledgers, we call them as virtual chains as well. And the blockchain services can be exposed as microservices in these networks. Then we can also lazily synchronize, and I think I'm running out of time, so quickly wrap up. So you can produce stuff in a local ledger and then also lazily publish to remote data centers. We use technology called Kafka to actually publish and distribute information. And it's applicable to various domains: healthcare, energy, automotive, climate, tracking. Think of all the fun things that you could do, and you can apply IoT, AI, blockchain, and so on to all of these things. Some examples are, for data privacy, you could execute microservices to manage the data. For emergency healthcare, for example, you could have an IoT-based service that monitors the patient and then calls the ambulance. That could be a microservice that's executing. And then as the patient is transferred by the ambulance, the patient data can be transferred from one hospital to another. And that can be executed in the blockchain. But patient data is private. So you don't want to store it on the ledger itself, store a hash of the data on the blockchain, but keep the data outside, but still transfer it between the hospitals. And you could have some automated consent given by the patient or caregiver or pre-authorized for the situation. And you could also automatically process insurance. And by the time the patient reaches the hospital, patient is ready for care. So, you can think of all of these smart applications. Also looked at micro lending at the edge, where, you could try to utilize distributed machine learning, because different edge communities may have different needs for micro lending, and then you could learn across India, but you could learn separately machine learning models at the edge. So that's an interesting thing with regard to AI is, as we learn, it's not only about infrastructures, you run these applications, you also want to learn the needs of a specific community in a village or a smart city, things like that, and build a model for that. And that model actually then, if you want to think about the resources that are going to get utilized, that will drive the needs, the resource requirements for the virtual functions that have to execute in that edge data center that's serving the smart city. And you can think about this, using this for energy and transportation and so on. Quantum is also fun, but I don't have time, but spend a lot of time on that as well. But essentially here, quantum states exist in a superposition of possibilities. So when you execute a quantum algorithm, you're able to explore multiple directions concurrently, which could help you solve difficult problems faster. And also AI, ML, traditional ML-based techniques like statistical-based techniques, deep learning-based techniques, and reinforcement learning is big now with feedback and so on. You should explore that in your research areas. And in general, you have 5G, IoT, AI, blockchain, and all coming together. 5G helps you allocate these end-to-end resources. IoT can help monitor and provide triggers for processing. Blockchain can record events, smart contracts, smart algorithms can execute in the system, and quantum-inspired algorithms can be executed as well. So in general, you can have a distributed network, but the primary goal should be to deliver useful services to people. I wanted to mention one more thing. At IAC, there's this thing about India Urban Data Exchange. So, they're trying to build an integrated command and control center for smart city or smart village. They want to combine all the data from different sources, fuse it into smarter application development. And then I wanted to show you this picture one more time if you want to kind of create some applications for a smart city. Think about these things. A lot of potential for you to kind of help communities. And so the future is, automated intelligent data processing and storage with the smart processing with ML and AI and all of that across these distributed cloud-edge networks. But think about what useful services you can provide to people and go from there, and you'll make a difference. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, sir. Any questions? One or two questions, please.
So you can always write to me. If there's anything in the chat window, if you see, let me know there.
Oh, yeah. So, Professor, sir, with your permission, I would like to do some concluding remarks and then vote of thanks.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So, first of all, if you see this talk, this is a motive behind this talk is it's an introductory talk. Then it will follow with its specific talk for the different topics within the 5G. This is what we are planning, our department is planning. So coming to this, if you see this 5G, so we have this main focus is high data rate, passive connectivity and low latency, which is needed for the mission critical applications. If you look at our department, so we have a group of faculty working in the various technologies related to 5G, which is Dr. M.H. Corey, which mentioned in his first talk. So, and also in the second talk where AI for ML, where that also will be taught by the our Aloknath Desar. Then of course this networking concepts and infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure, which is we have some group of faculty works in this area. So if you see, so some of the faculty who works in this area of NOMA, non-orthogonal multiple access, and then beamforming, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, small cell networks, AI and ML applying to this 5G. There are a group of faculty who are working here, and there is some group of faculty who works in the area of this cloud infrastructure also. So we'll come up to these various talks. Please stay tuned. Coming to my vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to give thankful to this management, especially our president sir and management team, which support us to organize this kind of talk, which is research-oriented talks. I am very much thankful to the talk under leadership of Pro VC sir, Dr. D. Narayan Rao sir, who gave us permission and always push us and encourage us to do this kind of research talks. And also, we are thankful to the registrar sir and the office staff, ITKM, who supported us in this area of organizing this talk. And I am very much thankful to the speakers who accepted my invitation and giving talk, very wonderful talk, which is a very excellent talk, which inspires us, all of us to learn more and do research in the various areas. So finally, not least, I would like to tell you participants as well as our department faculty and all our SRM community who support us to do this talk. Very wonderful. This concludes our session. So some quick announcements. So you people will receive, those participants will receive the participation certificate, and also feedback form. I'll request the ITKM department to send it. So, and also please stay tuned for the various talks we'll send soon. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great session. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So, Vasu?
Sir, can I end up the session, sir?
Yeah, please end up the session. Please keep record with you.
Okay, sir.
So we can do something, we can just share with the people and upload in our department website also.
Okay, sir.
And also one more thing, please kindly request the ITKM to send this feedback form to all the participants.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Sure, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.